The Side of Deception. A rogue agent exposes the Mossad's secret agenda by Victor Ostrovsky, performed by Theodore Bickel. I wrote this book to make known the truth about my journey. I have no doubt that there are those who would prefer that their account of the events be the record, and who will do all in their power to make it so. The intention of this book is not personal vendetta. That being said, this book is a factual account of events as they happened to me. Thursday, July 17th, 1986. The tiny cell was hot and musty. In a dim corner by the barred window, an old dingy-looking fan rattled, barely moving the foul-smelling air. I was trapped. 3 days earlier, I had arrived in Cairo on an Aer Lingus flight from New York. I was whisked away from the airport terminal by 2 burly men in short-sleeved gray safari suits. One of my seemingly friendly guerrilla escorts spoke English. He explained that he and his friend were taking me to a safe place. They held firmly onto my arms and ushered me to a small white car parked at the curb outside the main doors. "Welcome to Egypt," said the English speaker, who shared the back seat with me as the car took off. That was all he said until we cleared the airport complex. Then he handed me a blindfold and asked me to put it on. Those who spend any time in the espionage world come to expect these things. For the next 30 minutes I sat in the dark. I assumed we were on our way to meet the Egyptian intelligence and security brass, since the sole purpose of my visit was to sell out my former employer, the Mossad, Israel's famous intelligence agency. It wasn't every day that a Mossad case officer appeared on Egyptian intelligence's doorstep, ready to deal. I'd expected the red carpet treatment, but this was not it. When my blindfold was finally removed, I saw we were parked in the inner yard of an old British-style compound. The large square was surrounded by a dilapidated 5-story building. I was taken up a dark staircase to the 3rd floor. 2 uniformed guards, armed with submachine guns, greeted us and led the way through a long, dim corridor to a green metal door. I expected to be taken to an office of some sort. Instead, I found myself in a 10 by 12 cell. The heavy metal door slammed behind me. Then came the hollow sound of the key turning in the lock and the footsteps of my escorts as they walked away. I assumed at first that this was a temporary holding room, but my confidence shrank as I looked around. There was a stench in the air of old urine and human excrement. The window, which gave a view of the inner yard, was secured with heavy metal bars, and the big iron bed that filled most of the cell hinted at a lengthy stay. Panic started to set in. At that instant I realized I was a captive, and no one on the outside knew where I was. I walked through an uneven opening knocked through the thick wall into what seemed like a crypt. I found a shower stall closed off by a stained plastic curtain. Facing the shower there was a sloping floor with a hole in the center, known in the army as a shithole, a primitive toilet. I backed away once I realized that the hole, which was the source of the stench, was swarming with cockroaches. A minute later, I heard the key turning in the lock. An old man wearing a white galabeah walked in, carrying a tray of fruit and a large glass pitcher of cold lemonade, and a single glass. He smiled and put the tray on the end table by the bed, while a uniformed guard stood at the door watching. Several hours later, the old man returned with more food and a fresh pitcher of lemonade. By nightfall, I'd begun to accept that I would be here a while, and the implications worried me. There was no logical reason for the way I was being treated, unless the Egyptians knew something they shouldn't, and were now playing some sort of game. The heat didn't let up even after dark. I put the rattling little fan on the end table and directed it toward me. I then lay on my back in my underwear, wetting my face and chest with a damp towel. My head rested on a hard pillow as I tried to sleep. One question kept torturing me. How the hell did I end up in this 10 by 12 cell somewhere outside Cairo? I couldn't shake the terrifying thought that this was where I'd spend the rest of my life. that my wife and children back in Canada would never know I hadn't run away, that I was trapped. I couldn't tell where or when this was going to end, but I could almost pinpoint the time, if not the precise moment, it had all started. 6 months before, Monday, February 3rd, 1986, I'd been at the Sun Hull Hotel in Larnaca, Cyprus. I was there to meet a Belgian terrorist, and in my pocket I had a false British passport. The Belgian was a member of a left-wing terrorist organization called the Communist Combatant Cells, or CCC. The Belgian was expecting to receive a key to a car parked in Brussels, loaded with untraceable plastic explosives and several thousand top-of-the-line detonators. In exchange, I was to receive proof that over $2 million had been transferred to a Swiss bank account. It was a sting operation, and I was a full-fledged Mossad case officer at the time. It was on this assignment that things started to go haywire. There was more than one reason behind the sting. The CCC were involved in selling and buying arms from the PLO and other Palestinian groups. Putting them out of business would be a major victory for the Mossad in combating terrorism. Another reason was more sinister, and I learned about it much later. It involved a veteran case officer named Barda, who in 1984 had tracked down and contacted a band of Belgian renegade lawmen originally formed by NATO as a body to be activated in case of a communist invasion. This plan, called Operation Gladiator, was never put into action, but NATO neglected to dismantle the special cells, and so the Mossad stepped in to make use of one of them. The activation of the dormant cell was made with the consent of the Belgian State Secret Service and the Mossad's Anti-Terrorist Advisory Section. Barda made it clear to the Belgians that to get the public to call for a strengthening of the security services, extreme measures were needed. That is, terrorist atrocities that could be blamed on the communists. In addition to the NATO cell of right-wing lawmen, the Belgian Secret Service could draw from a deep well of right-wing fanatics. The Belgians request that the Mossad find a way to pass arms to the right-wingers while keeping the Belgian authorities out of the picture is what led to my being in Cyprus to help with the sting. Barda gave the right-wing terrorists the location of the CCC stashes of arms the Mossad had sold them. He told them they could help themselves to the goods while the communists were getting stung. The day before I was to transfer the key to the CCC man, I had met Ze'ev Alon. He was in charge of special technical operations and on his way off the island. Ze'ev briefed me on a new secondary assignment. I was now going to be a so-called backup relay station for an operation that had been hastily put together at the last minute. Cyprus is not a hospitable place for us, he said. The fewer people we have here, the better. Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi had called for a 3-day summit of what he called the Allied Leadership of the Revolutionary Forces of the Arab Nation. In other words, it was a meeting of all the terrorist kingpins. The Mossad was watching, drooling over this full house of goodies. A combatant had been dispatched to Libya for that occasion, posing as a reporter for the French-language paper Afrique Asie. A combatant is an Israeli recruited to carry out dangerous operations behind enemy lines. He's trained separately and doesn't possess any information about the organization, so if captured, he'll have no information to disclose. Once in Libya, this combatant learned that after the conference, several Palestinian terrorist leaders would fly to Syria aboard a private Gulfstream II executive jet. The Mossad convinced Prime Minister Peres to approve the skyjacking of the plane. Because of the extremely sensitive nature of the operation, the Mossad chief wanted to have positive eyewitness verification that the people in question were on board. The combatant would watch the actual boarding of the plane. Then he would transmit a message via a special mobile burst communication device. A merchant marine ship making its way to Gibraltar would receive the communique. The need for a backup was due to previous communication problems with the same type of device. It was dependent on good weather, which in this case wasn't expected. As planned, it was really a very simple operation. The combatant, after verifying that the terrorists had boarded the Gulfstream, would activate the signaling device and also call me at the hotel. If all was well, the message would be, "The chickens have flown the coop." I would then use a beeper to send the signal affirming the acceptance of the message. The meeting with the Belgian and the transfer of the key, my primary mission in Cyprus, went well. 9 days later, February 12, 1986, the Belgian police nabbed the man and his CCC colleagues. The terrorists had in their possession over 200 pounds of explosives and thousands of detonators. Simultaneously, Mossad's right-wing criminal partners entered several warehouses in the Antwerp area. The fascists got 2 truckloads of light weapons and several tons of ammunition. It was while carrying out the secondary operation that I got into hot water. While at the hotel in Larnaca, I had made an approach to, or as we called it in the field, established contact with, a Palestinian businessman from Amman, Jordan. He was one of the few tourists in the hotel. Such unauthorized contact was proscribed, but it was known that case officers do it all the time. Take the risk, we told ourselves. If it works, you're a hero. If not, you don't tell anyone. It turned out that the businessman had just come from Libya and had contacts in the PLO. I learned from him that there was to be a trick played on us in Tripoli, Libya. I knew the Mossad had considered the possibility of a trick, but no one gave the Palestinians that much credit. Convinced my information was reliable, I tried to contact everybody I knew in the system to stop what now seemed inevitable. I struggled with the endless buffers Mossad puts on a command and control center during an operation. It was somewhat ironic that the buffers put in place to enhance security were now blocking a warning. I eventually got the call from the combatant and relayed his message. I never learned whether the communique was transmitted to the merchant marine ship or not. Anyway, sure enough, the plane was forced down, and the big prize was not aboard. I left Cyprus aboard the yacht and eventually rendezvoused with Dabur. Someone didn't want me back in Israel just yet, so the Dabur was instructed to stay out at sea for several days. The Dabur captain was informed by Navy Command that he'd developed engine problems. Even as it was happening, I realized that the delay was to allow someone the time to set me up as the fall guy for this botched operation. I couldn't see how that sort of scapegoating was possible unless the combatant changed his story. Then I would be the one blamed for supposedly misunderstanding the message. Were that to happen, I had no doubt that the record of all my communications attempting to warn the command center would be erased, and as it turned out, that's exactly what occurred. When we finally docked in Ashdod, Oren Rif, then chief of staff for the Mossad head, was there to greet me. It was his job to fill me in on what my duty to the Mossad was. I was to take responsibility for the foul-up, accepting that I was doing it for the good of the office. That's the term used by Mossad people when talking about the Mossad, which is never mentioned by name. I had no choice in the matter, and so I agreed. Thursday, March 27th, 1986. 2 months had passed since the Cyprus fiasco, and the system was in torment over how to deal with me. On the one hand, I was a good product of the system's training and modeling process. However, several high-ranking officers had come to regard me as a divisive influence. One I barely knew, Ephraim, made it his personal crusade to expel me from what he called the first family of the state. He said that I was inflammatory, and that my political outbursts were a menace to morale. He agreed that I had the makings of a good case officer, but since I leaned to the left, I would be a danger to the system. The Mossad is a small organization with 30 or 40 case officers. By now I knew I was going to get the boot. I stood outside the large wooden doors of the academy at the edge of the staff parking lot. "Victor!" came a call from inside the main hall. I turned. It was Dinur, someone I had regarded as a friend. I was sure he still was. "What?" "They want to talk to you." He nodded in the direction of the offices. "Is the chief there?" "No, the boss isn't there. David Arbel is." "Why don't you listen to what Arbel and Gidon Naftali have to say?" "Naftali? What the hell is Naftali up to?" Naftali was head of the psychiatric department and someone I didn't respect. Gidon popped his head out of the office. "Victor, we're waiting for you. Can you please come in here now?" I nodded and entered the room. "You called?" "Yes," said Arbel. We want to talk to you about the termination of your contract with the Mossad. When will I have my talk with the boss? You won't. This will be your final talk. What are you talking about? You're not the boss, and this clown shouldn't be here anyway. Watch your mouth, Victor, Arbel said. Nor could you ever be. That's enough. Arbel's eyes were shooting sparks. I wanted to talk to you before you left. Now listen to me. Once on the outside, you'll forget everything you have learned, done, heard, or otherwise understood is taking place here. I thought I'd get a chance to tell the boss what I think is wrong. In my employment contract, it says that upon involuntary termination of the contract, I will have a meeting with the head of the Mossad and/or the Prime Minister. It says the meeting will take place before final termination of employment. I don't give a shit about your contract. Who are you going to complain to? Can't you see? We made that promise, and we can break it. Listen, Victor, get moving while you still have time. What are you telling me? You'll kill me if I don't play it your way? If that's what you said, it's a first. You know as well as I do that I'm one of the best field people you have, and I'm still a patriot, whether you like it or not. I got up and headed for the door. Don't you walk out on me! Arbel was now on his feet. Fuck all of you, I answered, not even turning around. Once I was inside my car, it hit me. This is it. Once I drive the 300 feet to the gate, it will be all over. Everybody I know at the Mossad will be a stranger. From this point on, all my access to information and the power that comes with it will be gone. I felt like throwing up, and at the same time I wanted to punch someone. It was almost midnight when I pulled into my parking stall under my apartment building in Herzliya. As I locked the car, I heard someone calling from inside the storage room. Victor! I stepped back. Don't be alarmed. I'm here to pick you up and take you to a meeting. Who are you? Only a messenger. I can't answer any of your questions, but you have nothing to worry about. He opened the screen door and stepped out closer to me. Shall we go? Is this some sort of joke? Believe me, it's no joke. Look, if we wanted to harm you, we could have done it even before your meeting with Arbel, okay? Nobody outside the Mossad could have said what this man just did. I could feel adrenaline rush into my system. Deep inside, I hoped the Mossad was calling me back. There's a black Lancia parked across the street. Get in the back seat. They'll take you to the meeting. Okay, but first I need to tell my wife I'm going. She'll be worried if she sees my car and I'm not around. After a 10-minute drive, we came to a stop behind an abandoned warehouse in the industrial area of Herzliya. A car was parked by the building. I spotted 2 men seated in it. They're waiting for you over there, said the driver. I got out and headed for the parked car. One man was now standing by the car. It was Ephraim, the officer who had constantly tried to get me fired. Seated next to him was a uniformed officer I recognized instantly, a brigadier general from the tank brigades. I had respected the man for a long time. I climbed into the back seat. The driver closed the door behind me. Ephraim extended his hand. Ephraim, I'm very happy to meet you again. I was dumbfounded. Well, aren't you going to shake my hand? No, I don't see why I should. You're a liar. You said things about me that weren't true, and they believed you. The general was silent, relighting his pipe every few minutes, filling the car with a sweet cherry smell. Ephraim was a heavy-set man, about 5'9". Okay, I'll get straight to the point, he said. Then ask all the questions you want. You didn't get yourself thrown out. You were set up. Don't kid yourself, though. You would have gotten kicked out sooner or later. Before we go any further, I want you to know that there's nothing you or I can do about it. So whether you help us or not, you can't go back. Wait, you're going too fast for me. Who set me up, and why? Do you have any idea what being a Mossad case officer means to me? What are you, some sort of a god? Cut the crap, Victor. What you want is the life that comes with the job. You want to keep your dick employed and have the glory like the rest of us, and that's okay. So how come when it's the rest of you, it's okay, and when it's me, I'm out? You're not out because of that. There are those who believe the Mossad exists for them to use. We have to stop them before it's too late. Too late? Too late for what? They'll lead us into a war, just as they have done already in Lebanon. One minute, please. What does all this have to do with me? I'm out of the game. Don't believe everything you hear, or see, for that matter. There's a lot you don't know. You're going to have to trust me. Trust you? I don't know you from a fucking hole in the wall. You were probably the reason behind me getting kicked out of the... Suddenly it dawned on me. He did get me kicked out. He wanted me for himself, for something he wanted me to do outside the system. I'd heard of things like this done in other agencies. Look, he said, I know how you feel, but you'll have to trust me, which is why I brought the general. You know him, don't you? I looked at the rugged face staring at me from the front seat. The general's eyes pierced through me. I nodded. Good. Now listen carefully. We don't have much time. Why? What's the rush? Your friends are not so sure about you. Some think you might be back. Others think you might become very noisy with what you know. What are you telling me? They want you out of the way, you know. Dead. You wouldn't be the first. So what will they do? Shoot me? Or run me over? No. They'll have you called for reserves and posted as a liaison officer to the South Lebanese Army. How long do you think you'll live in South Lebanon? They know me there as Mossad, probably a few hours. I would appreciate it if you could take me home now so I could spend what little time I have left with my family. Do you really think we'd drive out on such a night and sit in a car and wait, just to tell you what is going to happen without some sort of solution? I smiled. I'm listening. When you get home, you tell your wife that you were kicked out of the Mossad. You will tell her that you just met with some friends who told you that you should get out of the country fast. What do I do for money? Sell that clunker of a car. What can I get for that? Just to get out of the country, you'll need about $5,000. The car isn't worth more than $2,000. Put a sign on it and sell it for $6,000. Trust me, you'll sell it. Then get a ticket on Tower Air to London. You will arrive at Gatwick Airport. Stay at the Skyway Hotel. I'll contact you there. Why are you doing this? What's in it for you? You have my offer. I recommend you take it. I'll tell you the rest when we meet in London. That is, if you get there. He got out of the car and walked around to the driver's seat. Do what he asks you to, Victor, said the general. Trust him. It'll be good all around. What about my military release? Not turning his head, Ephraim handed me a small manila envelope. Papers are in order and registered on the computer. They will expire in 72 hours. And if you're not on your way to London before that, so will you. I walked silently back to the parked Lancia and got in. If what Ephraim had said was true, and I had little doubt it was, then there was a good chance that even his help wasn't going to get me out of this mess. He headed a powerful clique in the Mossad, but his power was apparently limited. What was I supposed to tell Bella now? Honey, they kicked me out, and now they want to kill me, so I'll be leaving for England? I found myself standing there, looking for a news story rather than the truth. I was beginning to think that there was no truth left in me. I prayed she wouldn't give up on me. I knocked on the door, and Bella, after peeping through the spy hole, opened. She left the door open and walked into the living room. She was in a soft white robe, her dark hair shining. There was no smile on her beautiful face. It seemed as though there hadn't been a smile there for some time. I was uneasy. Everything that was dear to me was in this cozy apartment. Remorse for the agony I had caused Bella was gnawing at me. I knew she could see through me. So, what was that all about? She asked. They kicked me out. I'm no longer with the office. If they kicked you out, why did they come and talk to you downstairs? Someone came to tell me it would be a good idea if I got out of the country. What are you talking about? Leave? Leave where? Why? When? I got up and went over to her, took her in my arms. There was something radiating from her that soothed the dull pain in the base of my chest. Calm down, I said. It's going to be all right. She pushed me away. I told you this would happen. What will they do to you if you stay? I don't know. You know what they can do. Where will you go? I thought about flying to England and from there to the States. I'll stay with my dad for a while, and then we'll see. Why England? That would be the cheapest flight, and then I could get a charter from England to the States. So when will you be leaving? I sat next to her on the sofa and pulled her toward me. Day after tomorrow. She threw her head against my chest. She was crying. I wanted to pull her face up so I could kiss her, but she wouldn't let me. I love you, Bella, I said. I hugged her as hard as I could. I wanted the moment to last. Friday, March 28th. I got up early and showered before my 2 daughters were up. I wanted to wake them with a kiss. It was the memory of a loving father that I somehow wanted to burn into their minds. I wanted to do it fast, in an instant, with one big hug, because there was no way I could reach back into the past and hand them all the time I had stolen from them. Less than an hour after I had put the for sale sign on the car and parked it on the curb across from my building, the phone rang. "I'm calling about the car," said what sounded like a young man. "How much are you asking for it?" 6,000 American, I said, trying not to laugh. "Can I come and take it for a spin?" I had no doubt it was one of Ephraim's people coming to take the car and give me the money so that I could leave. This whole charade had to be played out because the home phones of Mossad officers were frequently monitored by Mossad security. I knew that if they were listening, they too would laugh at the price, but they'd probably just think I'd landed a sucker. By noon that day, I'd purchased my tickets. Monday, March 31st, Gatwick, England. 24 hours had passed, and still no word from Ephraim. I decided to head for London to get my mind off things for a while. In the hotel elevator, I noticed the sweet aroma of cherry tobacco. It got stronger the closer I got to my room. I stood by the door and listened. I heard Ephraim and the general talking. I entered the room quickly. They sat staring at me, bewildered. "Why are you so surprised to see me?" I said. "Who were you expecting?" "I asked you to wait for me at the hotel," Ephraim said harshly. "I don't work for you, my friend. I'm here as a favor. I saved your life, remember? You could be in Lebanon right now. You only got me out of something you put me into, and probably in order to get me into something else. Look here, Victor." Ephraim started. The general put a hand on Ephraim's shoulder. "Man's right. Why play games? We know what we want and why we want it. You've got a job for him. Fill him in." "I'm listening," I said. "This all started in '82. You were still in the Navy. You probably know we were preparing for a war in Lebanon. At that time, the operation was still called the Cedars of Lebanon, and we in the Mossad had a close relationship with Bashir Gemayel's Christian Phalange. Our man dealing with Gemayel was Nevot. Nevot was in the midst of getting Israel involved in what he and other right-wingers called the best war we'll ever have. They saw Israel as the policeman of the Middle East. Prime Minister Begin loved the idea of appearing to be saving Christians from the savage Muslims, which fit in well with his right-wing colonialist ideology. Ariel Sharon, then Minister of Defense, was all for it. Hofi, then head of the Mossad, was against the ploy, saying that the Christian Phalange in Lebanon was not a reliable ally. Military intelligence agreed with him. But Hofi, who'd been in office for almost 8 years then, was on his way out. Many people in the Mossad were hoping that this time they would get an insider to run the show. As you well know, until that point it had always been an outsider who was parachuted into office. I nodded. I knew this was the only way the outside world could ever have any control over the Mossad. A new chief from the outside, meaning the military, was a way to clean house. Begin decided that he would keep with tradition, Ephraim went on, and have an outsider take office. At that point, when the war was about to start and Hofi already had one foot out of the Mossad, the right wing managed to place many of its own in positions of power. In fact, All of us in the Mossad were getting tired of having our future plans shattered and changed every time a new boss came. And the right-wingers especially were not going to give up what they'd grabbed. General Yekutiel Adam, Kuti, was appointed head of the Mossad and was supposed to take office sometime at the end of June 1982. The war in Lebanon started on June 6th, and on the second day of the war, Kuti had a run-in with Sharon regarding the attack on the Syrian anti-aircraft missiles in the Bekaa. Kuti believed and stated clearly that this might lead to an all-out war with the Syrians. He was undermining the effort the Mossad, in combination with Gemayel, had worked so hard and so long to mount. The top clique realized what was coming if this man became the new chief. Someone decided that it was not to be. Kuti was my best friend, the general spat out. He had friends in the Mossad, continued Ephraim. People who were preparing working papers analyzing the situation so that he could take drastic action once he took office and not spend time wasting the lives of young soldiers who were being used as cannon fodder for the top clique's dream of a Mossad-run state in Lebanon. It was clear that the reign of the top clique was threatened with an abrupt end. Once Kuti took control, he'd pass an honest assessment of the situation to the government and to Sharon, who wouldn't want to be the first Israeli Minister of Defense to lose a war. The opportunity came on June 10th. The army had entered the outskirts of Beirut, and there was a ceasefire in effect. Kuti, appointed to head the Mossad, but not yet in office, requested a farewell visit to his troops in Lebanon. It was the Mossad's job to organize it. They planned the visit for the next day. When Kuti arrived at the location, he was killed in an ambush. The attacker, a 14-year-old kid, was killed on the spot by the guards. I got up. That's crazy. I could not believe what he was implying. He looked straight at me. They found a photo of Kuti on the kid. Who else would have known Kuti was there, except the people who planned this sudden little trip? The Mossad, or rather elements within the Mossad, killed him. So, you wait 4 years and then tell me about it? No. You're the latest step that we are taking. You have to realize that working against the Mossad from the inside is not the easiest thing in the world to do. So no one asked how come that photo was found in the killer's pocket? That particular piece of information was kept from the investigative committee. The one piece of evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was not a coincidence, but in fact a calculated murder. I could feel cold sweat on my forehead. What he was telling me was unbelievable. The front line of the Mossad command conspires to kill the newly appointed head? You're crazy. He's not crazy, said the general. I know, because he's not the only one who told me. I found out more about it when I interrogated a captured Hezbollah fighter in the south of Lebanon in the beginning of '85. He was talking about how, when he was in Nabi Berri's Amal Shiite militia, he was supposed to go with a kid on a mission to kill an Israeli general, and let me tell you, the man was not lying. How do you know? Because he knew he was going to die, and the question was whether it was going to take all night or just a few minutes. I turned to Ephraim. How come you didn't go to the Prime Minister? And say what? Sir, right-wing elements within the Mossad have just killed the appointed head? What do you think he'd say? Thanks for telling me. I'll call the bastards and fire them? Besides, there was a war going on at the time. Within the next day or two, at the most, I would have had an accident of my own. How do I know you're not just setting me up, and it's you who wants to stage a coup d'etat? You have to trust me. We can't do this without someone on the outside. I'm listening. I think this would be a good time to have something to eat, Ephraim said. He turned to the general. Rami, will you go out and bring us something, if that's okay with you? I'm on my way, Rami said slowly, the pipe in his mouth. After the general left, I turned to Ephraim. You screwed up my life, I said. I did no such thing. All I did was pick you out of a specially selected group of people, just before you were going to self-destruct. And you were right for the job. Let me tell you, I don't want to destroy the Mossad, which is something the general would be happy to do. I want to fix it. Why? Because I believe our country needs a Mossad, a strong Mossad with teeth that can tear our enemy apart. But above all, it needs a leash so that it can be kept under control. Okay, but why should I want to do anything for you? What I wanted to tell you is that I can't use someone from inside, because I don't have a clue whom I can trust. The general has been a buddy of mine for years, and he was a close friend of Cooties, so he's clean. You I have taken straight from the womb. You're not yet tainted, and you came in because you were a patriot, not because you wanted to make a career. Well, I wanted that, too. I wanted the job, the life, the fun. If you want the life, stick around. You'll get more than you can handle. So, what now? Are you going to offer me a job? That is exactly what I'm doing. Your cover will be you. Everything you do will be on your own. You have no net and no tether. I will hand you an assignment and help you as much as I can, but you will be out there on your own. Doing what? You'll be putting the present Mossad out of business. There was a knock on the door. Ephraim stiffened. I walked to the door and stared through the peephole. It was the general. He entered as though the corridor were on fire. He clearly didn't enjoy playing the spook. For the next hour, we ate. So, what next? The general asked. Ephraim stood up. We'll be leaving shortly, and Victor here will leave tomorrow. I will? Yes. You're going to New York, and then you will go visit your dad in Nebraska. Why New York? The general asked. Victor here will go visit the PLO office in New York. If all the lights and bells go off in headquarters, we'll know that he has a tail. Victor here will be asked to do things in the near future that are extremely dangerous. He will have to do them in places much less hospitable than New York. If there's a problem with his cover, or if someone suspects him of wrongdoing, this is the time to find out about it, when he is in the United States, where it is more difficult for the Mossad to operate. If they are watching us now, they will want to see what comes next. So we'll hand it to them on a platter. If they're on our tail, as soon as he enters the PLO office, they'll almost instantly arrest me. And you, General. Ephraim stared at me silently for several seconds. You'll arrive in New York on April 2nd. From that point on, you'll be on your own. I won't recommend a hotel for you. In fact, I don't want to know. Here's the number I want you to call after the meeting in the PLO offices. He handed me a business card. There's a number like that in New York. It's a bakery. Dial the same number in Tel Aviv, and I'll be there. And if you're not, call back 3 times, once every 4 hours, never from the same place. After the first time, start your disappearing act. By the last call, you should be gone. What should I do if they get you? Just try to stay alive and out of their hands. This I can tell you. You'll be better off than we will. That's cold comfort for me. What about my family? If we are caught, you don't have one. For them, you'll be as good as dead. Wednesday, April 2nd. I arrived in New York feeling like a wreck. I was exhausted, plastered from the endless stream of little rum bottles I'd consumed on the flight. After a short taxi ride, I ended up at a small motel not too far from the airport. Thursday, April 3rd. The first light coming through the loose top of the curtain jolted me into consciousness. After a long, hot shower, I felt sufficiently revitalized to embark on the day's errands. I called the front desk and told the man I wanted to keep the room for a few more days. Then I asked him to call me a cab. In less than half an hour, I was in front of the UN building. From there, I walked to the PLO offices. I wanted to be relatively quick and make sure I did not lose any tail I might have. I was nervous. I had dealt with Palestinians before, but always from a position of strength, with the entire military or Mossad mechanism close behind me. Today was very different. The reception area was lined with brochures and posters, the light blue and gray coloring giving the place a sophisticated aura. The front room was deserted for several minutes, until a tall, well-dressed man entered. I felt slightly out of place in my jeans and black leather jacket. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'd like to talk to someone in charge, please." "I'm in charge. My name is Yassin." What can I do for you? Well, can we talk freely here? That depends on what you want to say. I'm sure that there are more people listening in on this room than are present. I drew my Israeli passport out of my pocket and handed it to him. I wonder if you might join me for a coffee, I said. There's a nice little place just across from here. He seemed somewhat surprised as he leafed through the document. Then he handed it back to me, smiling. Actually, I was just on my way out. There is an even better place down the street. Would you care to join me? I'd be delighted. I smiled back, feeling great. I'd made contact, and if the Mossad were in fact watching me, they'd see me with a man who I had no doubt was known to them. We would know for sure in a very short time what was going on, if anything. The restaurant was badly lit and looked like a scene from a Bogart movie. I ordered a coffee, and he did the same. So, what was it you wanted to talk about? I just wanted to give you a warning. Nothing personal or imminent, just a general warning, that's all. About what? Ephraim had made it very clear that I was not to go into detail, only to give general information, and then throw in an example or two to make them realize I was not some loony off the street. It's important that you tell your top brass that everything they say on any phone they use is listened in on. We know that. What do you think we are, stupid? Who are you, anyway? All I can say is that not everybody who is against you is your enemy. There are those who think that even though we are on two sides of the barricades, we will have to live together, or at least next to each other in peace. Look, we have many enemies, and the authorities in this country are looking for any excuse to kick us out of here and make a mockery of our cause. I will have to end this conversation with you. I understand. Only one more thing you must take back, and that is that only in Tunis is Arafat safe. You people are funny. You know more about us than we do. You know our history, our customs, our daily habits. You know the location of every tree in the Palestinian forest, but you can't see the forest. You can't comprehend us as a people. All I can tell you is that there are many on our side of the barricade who want to live in peace and be free. There are those who think that this can only be achieved over the dead bodies of your people. Most of us do not, but we will never break ranks to be slaughtered by you. We ask for respect and a place we can call our home. Now let me send a warning to you, and it is nothing personal. But trust me, there will come a time, and it is not far off, when the extremists will take our place. And then all you will have to talk to will be your ancient wall. Tell whoever sent you to seize the moment. He got up and held out his hand. I stood and shook his hand, noticing a small smile on his face. Tell them, he said, if they want to see who we really are, all they have to do is look in the mirror. After Yassin walked out of the restaurant, I remember feeling a strange sensation, having met a PLO man face to face on an equal footing, and realizing he was a nice person. I kept looking at him as he made his way outside, past the restaurant window. I leaned to one side and saw him turn the corner. I had about 2 hours to kill before making my scheduled telephone call. Ephraim had calculated that if the alarms in Mossad headquarters didn't go off by then, we were safe. This was a crucial point in the operation. If anything went wrong, the entire program would be eliminated. Ephraim would probably rot away in some jail cell, and I would make it to the top of the Mossad hit list. It was afternoon in Israel. I got through without a hitch, and Ephraim was almost instantly on the line. The sound of his voice came as a relief. I guess you did what you had to do. Yes, I did. Okay, so much for the first step. Now get out of sight, just get lost. Stay at your father's place until I say you can leave. Is that clear? Yes, but give me an estimated time. When I come to visit, I need to know a time frame. I can't tell you. The line went dead. I was alone again in New York. I could feel the numbness the afternoon's activity had given me starting to dissipate. I called my father from the motel. He was happy to hear from me and surprised to learn I was in New York. He offered to pay my ticket so that I could come out and visit him. My dad always offers to pay for everything and quite often does. But I said I could handle it and that I planned on arriving in Omaha the following day. I was not exactly enthusiastic about this visit. Not being able to tell my father how long I planned to stay put me in an odd situation. I told him that I was between assignments and was waiting for a call from a friend who was my boss. As an ex-officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force and then in the Israeli Air Force, he knew not to ask too many questions. Once my friend called, I explained, I would know where I was supposed to go. I told him and his wife Gigi that my friend would be arriving in Washington shortly, and if there was any problem about my staying with them, I could wait for my man in Washington. I had never really spent much time with my dad before. My parents had separated when I was about 5, and my mother had taken me with her to Israel. It wasn't so much that she wanted to raise me, but rather she didn't want my father to. In fact, my maternal grandparents were saddled with that job. It was my grandparents who ingrained in me the love for Israel and the Zionist movement. At the same time, fearing that if my father had direct contact with me, he would take me to the United States, they made sure that such a connection did not exist. All communication with him was severed until I reached the age of 17 and found a letter from my father addressed to me, hidden in a drawer, along with a monthly child support check. Up until that point, I was led to believe that he didn't want to have anything to do with me. It is hard today to quantify the pain that belief caused me through the years. Nor can I express the anger I felt when I discovered that this was not the case, and that all those years had been wasted. Later I would learn that such a letter had arrived monthly for years, and that my father, having seen that the check was cashed without any reply, was sure I wanted nothing to do with him. He never imagined I was not made aware of his letters. Shortly after finding that letter, I phoned him, and later I visited him just before joining the army. Since then, we had met several times, but somehow we were never able to bridge the gap between us. On this visit, I didn't feel much different. I couldn't sit him down and run the truth by him much as I wanted to, and probably should have. The quiet life my dad was living in an affluent neighborhood in Omaha only intensified my feelings of frustration at being ripped away from Bella and the kids to dangle on a thin string over a bottomless pit. The telephone talks I had with Bella were getting to be more and more frustrating. She wanted to know when things were going to start moving. I could not fill her in on what was really going on, and so I had to build up a cover story for her. I kept telling her I was looking for a job. There was one thing I had not considered. I had always regarded Bella as a person who would not pass on any information about us because she was a very private person. One day she called me in Omaha. Gigi, my father's wife, answered the call. They struck up a conversation in which Bella, thinking that my family in Omaha knew that I was really looking for a job there, made a statement to that effect, asking if Gigi knew how things were going. I had never told Bella not to ask, nor did I tell her it was not common knowledge that I was looking for work. It turned out that the two women surprised each other. I had been to the shopping center, where I had called Ephraim from a payphone to let him know I was fed up, and if he wasn't about to get moving, I was. I didn't reach Ephraim, but there was a message for me to meet him in 2 days in Washington. He would be waiting for me in a hotel somewhat out of the way, the Holiday Inn in Silver Springs, Maryland. Back at the house, I received a call from Bella. She was both wrathful and concerned. She told me about her conversation with Gigi, demanded an explanation, and started to cry on the phone. The faint hope I had built up in her regarding our future was dashed again. I tried to explain, and at the same time I was thinking about what to do. I knew that when I faced Gigi, she would not be the gracious hostess I'd encountered before. My dad would probably be incensed at my having lied to him. The only consolation I had was in that message Ephraim had left me. Things were starting to move. I pulled myself together. "I can't tell you anything now," I said to Bella. "You will just have to take my word for it. Trust me, just this one more time, please." "I know this is the end," she said. Her voice as sad as a human voice could ever be over a wire stretching thousands of miles. "I will never see you again, will I?" "Don't talk like that. What are you talking about?" Deep down I had the feeling she might just be right. My dad drove me to the airport later that day. We had a brief exchange of words, trying to keep his voice from cracking. He told me that no matter what, he was my father and he loved me. I told him I loved him too, and left him sitting in his car as I entered the terminal. I was hoping he'd come after me and try to drag out of me what the hell was going on, but he didn't. I was a mystery to him, a memory of a relationship that had gone sour years ago. Sunday, April 20th. It was raining in Washington when I landed. I was a lonely stranger in an unfamiliar place, feeding on my own silence. I took a cab from the airport to the Holiday Inn in Silver Springs. Being registered in the hotel under my real name during an operation made me feel naked. My cover story was that I was looking for a site on which to build a restaurant. I called Bella and gave her the hotel phone number. If someone was listening on the line, they would not suspect a thing. Monday, April 21st. The phone rang. It was Ephraim. "So, I see you arrived early," he said. "Why don't we have breakfast?" "Sure. Give me 10 minutes. I'll meet you in the dining room." He hung up. I jumped out of bed. At last things were starting to move. The sooner I did what had to be done, the sooner it would be over and I could get on with my life. I made my way directly to Ephraim's table. After some small talk, something that Ephraim was not good at, he said, "You'll make a short journey across town and offer our British friends your services." "The British? They're allies. What the hell do you need from them?" "Nothing in particular. It's just that we know they're suspicious that we might have had something to do with the attempt to put a bomb on an El Al flight." "The one that was foiled at Heathrow?" "That's the one." "But didn't El Al security prevent that at the last moment?" "Exactly. There's a rumor running around that we did it to embarrass their security and show off our own, and at the same time to pin the terrorists' tail on the Syrians." "Did we?" "Quite possibly. I have no idea. But the rumor has to stop." "So, you want me to go in there and tell them we didn't do it?" I was smiling. I found the whole thing amusing. "No, you tell them you're no longer working for us." He handed me a manila envelope. "These are some papers you can give them to prove that you worked for the Mossad. This is a simple job. I need you to do it as soon as you can. I will be here while you do it and leave after you're done. You know, this job doesn't quite jive with what you've been telling me. I thought we were out to put the Mossad in the shit and force a change in the command. Suddenly we're protecting their reputation? We're killing two birds with one stone. On the one hand, we're cleaning up the reputation of Israel when it comes to this sort of unacceptable act, as well as putting the lid on Syrian diplomatic relations in England. Then, at the same time, we're giving you a good in with the British. You'll have more credibility with them later. We'll use that credibility to embarrass the office and blow the Mossad's London station out of the water." It turned out that this little game with the British was difficult. We were facing a sophisticated agency that had good, if not excellent, connections with the Mossad. The fact that there was growing concern in that agency regarding the Mossad's dirty tricks was not something we could latch on to right away. It would be necessary to dig a little first. I had to have a reason for coming to them and be able to prove that I was Mossad. Ephraim had given me several documents that I could use to convince them that I was who I said I was. One was a photocopy of a British passport that I had used in an operation in Europe almost a year earlier. We decided that I would play the man who has two reasons for coming to them. One would be money, the other revenge. It was about 2 in the afternoon when I got out of the cab 2 blocks from the embassy. I came across a payphone, found the number of the embassy in a phone book, and dialed. In less than 2 minutes, I managed to get through to the man in charge of security. "I have been fired from the Mossad, and I want to talk to someone in British intelligence. I have some information that I think might interest you." The interview at the British Embassy lasted almost 3 hours. I presented him with a single Mossad document, the false passport cover page that Ephraim had brought me. It was an 8.5 by 11 photocopy of the first page of a British passport. The top part gave a short rundown of who I was under that cover. On the back was my exact address marked on a London map. Attached was a color photo of my house and imaginary family with a few words about each of them. The document was what we would call a tutorial cover. This document was extremely professional, and anyone in the business would be convinced that the bearer was not an amateur. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Ostrovsky, for what you have told me up to this point. I will surely pass this information on to the people that need to know. I'll be back in touch with you once I know what they want to do. I knew this would be the procedure. The Inquisition would come later. Where can I reach you? He asked. I'll call you. When would you like me to do that? He thought for a minute. How about tomorrow at about the same time? Ephraim had armed me with more documents. The nagging doubts I'd had before had almost completely dissipated. Ephraim wanted to be present the next day when I made the call to the embassy, just in case there was something we'd overlooked. I made the call and was asked to come to the embassy as soon as I could. When I arrived at the British Embassy, I was greeted by the same chap who'd interviewed me before. He led me into an office similar to his own. The man seated behind the desk got up and stretched out his hand, smiling. I'm Steve. Nice of you to come back at such short notice. I'm Dave. Nice to be called back. Dave? But I was under the impression that your name was Victor. Just kidding, I said. Dave was my Steve, you see. So it is Victor. Is there anything we can get you? I'd love a coffee, I said. The young man left the room to get coffee. Steve said, my colleague might come in a little later. He has a certain thing he wants to show you and get your opinion on. Will you be handling the case? Yes. Why do you ask? There is the matter of the money. We need to discuss that before we go any further. I can assure you that we'll be more than grateful for your help. The money will depend totally on what you have to say to us. Could you be more specific? I'm afraid not. You see, we are not the ones who make that decision. After all, we don't normally gather information about Israel, since it's an ally. Why don't we cut the bullshit right off the top, I said. We're here for a reason. You want something that you know very well I have. You want to verify first that I am who I am. Then you want to know what you can get out of me. I would prefer to think of it as an exchange. Come on. We both know that if you could get me on a rack and beat the information out of me, you would. And apart from money, there's nothing I want from you. So, where would you like to start? From the beginning, I suppose. What was your rank and position in the Mossad? My rank was colonel. Is there a clandestine station in London? Yes. How many case officers? 5, as of 2 months ago. Who is the head of the station? I'm really bad with names, you know. Would you be able to recognize him from a photo? Do you have one? We have photos of most of the diplomats. The young man came back with a coffee. After he'd left, Steve and I established a more relaxed dialogue. A few minutes later, Steve's partner stuck his head round the door. Robert, the newcomer, opened a large folder and pulled out several cardboard sheets with passport photos. Would you mind looking at these and telling me if you recognize anyone? I glanced at them. Yes, I do. Well, would you be so kind as to point them out to us? How about you show me who the station chief is? After a short hesitation, he pointed to one. You're right. That is Yair. From my shirt pocket, I pulled out a photo that Ephraim had given me just before I left for the embassy. I laid it next to the photo he was pointing at. It was the same. Credibility was established right there and then. The questioning went on for several hours. We went in detail into the way the Mossad activates, maintains, and recruits its more than 3,000 Jewish helpers called Sayanim in Great Britain, how it maintains over 100 safe houses in the Greater London area, and services the recruitment needs of other smaller stations in Europe. The safe house situation was one that seemed to bother them. If we wanted to clean up, where would you say we should start? First, you'd have to get your politicians to realize that moving against the Mossad is not a move against the State of Israel, that the Mossad is a loose cannon, and that it is extremely damaging to whoever comes into contact with it. I believe we have already established that. What we are asking about is the operational information. What is the flaw in the system? What aspect of their work would you want to stop? Well, it's not acceptable to us that they're using British subjects in their operations, and targeting an entire minority, such as the Jewish community, is despicable. Second, we cannot sit idly by as they recruit diplomats who are under our protection and put our relationships with those countries in jeopardy. Well, you need to catch them in the act. What you need to do is watch the safe houses. I would tend to agree with you, but how do we find them? You follow the bordel. The bordel is a separator, your so-called flaw in the system. He is the one who takes packages and things from the Mossad station in the embassy to the safe houses and back. He is the secret gopher. Usually fresh out of an elite military unit, is a young Israeli who had received special anti-surveillance training and is the best there is in that field. He makes most of the trips to the safe houses during the day and most of the pickups during the night. He rarely uses embassy vehicles and does not have any specific patterns of work. Go and chase the wind? Is that what you're telling us? And you call this a flaw? That is what the man is supposed to do. That is not always what he does. The safe houses are also manned by Israeli students who make sure the houses are well stocked with food and other essentials. They are usually the same age as the bordel and will meet with him socially. Place the bodlim under surveillance and you have your safe house. The room was silent for several seconds. This is a very sensitive area, Robert said. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair. I was very satisfied with myself. I knew I had accomplished what I had been sent to do, and I'd had a good time doing it. Until now, that is. It wasn't over yet. If we follow the man and uncover the safe houses, what will we find? I mean, can you imagine the scandal if we uncover several cases like Pollard? Pollard, the American civilian naval intelligence analyst who'd spied for Israel in America. We would be branded anti-Semitic on the spot, Steve remarked. That will not happen, I returned. The station will not use safe houses for their sayanim. They meet them in their own houses and under everyday circumstances. The safe houses are used purely for debriefing or field planning sessions with case officers who do not enter the embassy. It was getting dark outside, and we all realized that there was little more that we could say at this time. Information had to be analyzed, and more questions would come after that. It was time to call it a day. Robert pulled a white envelope from his pocket and put it on the table in front of me. This is a small token of our appreciation. We would like to talk to you again in the near future and ask more questions and, of course, pay for the ones you have answered. I counted the money in the envelope outside the embassy and realized how cheap the British were. About $800 was much more than I had at the moment, but I knew I had handed them a golden pickaxe with which to dig the Mossad's claws out of their soil. I knew that I had single-handedly managed to destroy the Mossad's capability in England for some time. This was fulfilling my duty and tasting the sweet taste of revenge at the same time. I scared myself, realizing how much I hated them. I hated the people who had taken me away from the streets of Tel Aviv and a life I was happy in. I hated them for shaking my belief in the Zionist dream that had been placed in their hands to protect. Ephraim was half asleep on the bed. The television was muted and the lights were off. "What are you doing?" he asked when I picked up the receiver. "Ordering some coffee. The Brits don't have a clue how to make it right." "So? You trust the Americans with that?" I made the order and told him everything. "Did they bring up the El Al thing?" he asked. "Just like you said. They believe the Mossad is capable of this kind of trick." "They are right." "You mean we did do it?" "I didn't say that. I said we were capable of it, and we've done similar things in the past." Ephraim was asking me questions. By the time I finished, he was satisfied he knew everything that had taken place at the embassy. "Now, we'll talk about the big job," he said. "You did great, Vic, even though you enjoyed it, which you shouldn't have." So, he did notice that I liked what I had done, and I thought I had him fooled. Now, this was going to be it, the final job, the one that would end this state of oblivion I was in. A gopher for the rebels. "Look, Vic, some people believe we should have peace with the Palestinians, and some think we should kick their butts. But what it comes down to is this. What are our right-wingers willing to do to get what they want? As you know, the people who want peace are made to look like traitors, while the other side is made out to be the patriots. Well, you have enough friends in the media. If you have an image problem, why don't you use them? They want to force the Jordan is Palestine thing. They have political support for this, and an alliance with right-wing radicals that would guarantee massive support from the diaspora. Now the Mossad is plunging headlong into this shit. They've decided that it's time to destabilize Jordan to the point of civil anarchy. Destabilize how? A high influx of counterfeit currency causing distrust in the market, arming religious fundamentalist elements similar to the Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and assassinating leading figures who are symbols of stability, causing riots in the universities, and forcing the Jordanian government to respond with harsh measures and lose popularity. You know what I'm talking about. Everything you learned about, and more. So, what do you want me to do? I want you to tell the Jordanians about it, so they can stop it before it's out of control. How the hell am I going to tell the Jordanians this and have them believe me? Why don't you tell them? You have channels to the Jordanians. That isn't good enough. This has to be ongoing. Every time they manage to stop one thing, our people will come up with another. You will have to get them to recruit you. This time, it's not just a short exercise. This is for real. I was speechless. This was far more serious than I had imagined. I was setting myself up for a hanging. There's only a short time for you to get in there and have a really good chance at not being detected. What do you want me to do? What he told me was not music to my ears. I was to totally sever ties to everything. I would start a fast descent into the gutter, from where I would appear to be much more appealing and believable to my new masters. Ephraim was sending me out on the street without a cent. You make contact when you're hungry, and after you've gotten the link, call this number and we'll meet. There was to be no other contact with him. I was still under my real identity, and I was to keep loose contact with Bella. That was the only point that I found difficult. I was going to start this charade the next day. I was going to make a head-on approach that I knew I could handle. I put my Israeli passport in my pocket and headed for the subway. 20 minutes later, I was at the gate of the Jordanian embassy. "I need to talk to someone from security," I said, pulling out my Israeli passport and showing it to the guard. He reached out to take it, but I put it back in my pocket, only to the man in charge of security. He hesitated, then picked up the phone and spoke in rapid Arabic for several seconds. Then he turned to me. "Just 1 minute, please. The person you want is on his way." The place was as foreign to me as a place could get. The tall, elegant man sat under the king's portrait and pointed to the seat opposite. "Would you care for something to drink, or perhaps a snack?" I began to wonder if there was some universal law of interrogation that stipulated subjects always be offered food and drink first. "A coffee would be great," I replied. He spoke to the guard who'd escorted us to the room and sent him on his way. He then put my passport on the desk in front of me. "What brings you to us, Mr. Ostrovsky? You could say that greed brought me here, also a good dose of wanting revenge." "Revenge?" There's a nice word. Who do you want to take revenge upon? My former employer. And who might that be? The Mossad. I could see the color on his face change from a healthy tan to a dusty gray. Had I chanced upon a mole the Mossad had in Jordan? How do we know that you are who you say you are? I have some documentation that you can see, and I'm willing to answer any questions. We both lit cigarettes, and the questioning started. After several hours, the man was satisfied that I was who I said I was. Now I'll call my boss, he said. He might have some questions for you. A pleasant gentleman in his late 50s entered the room. The younger man stood to attention. Mr. Ostarovsky, Brigadier General Zuhir. I am very pleased to meet you, Victor. I hope we'll have a long and fruitful relationship. The man was good. Right off the bat, he came across as a friend. I understand that you are a Mossad officer, or rather an ex-Mossad officer. That's correct. Do you know the liaison officer of the Mossad in Washington? I do. I know him too. We met at a party at the State Department last Christmas. Well, that wouldn't be my friend. Why is that? He wasn't here last Christmas. He only came here 3 months ago. The man smiled. It was clearly a trick question that very few people could have answered correctly. Now that I know you were a member, how do I know you're not one anymore? You have to trust me, I guess. What are you offering us? I could help bring your intelligence agency into the 20th century, and at the same time prevent some bad things from happening to your economy and your king. What do you mean when you say that about the king? Is there any danger to the king? Yes. Nothing imminent or anything that I could tell you about at the moment, but yes, there are those who would like to see him dead. The room fell silent. The general was thinking. The tension was rising. Would you be willing to go to Amman, Jordan, and see someone there? Amman? The question came at me like a locomotive. Amman, the capital of Jordan, so close to Israel, yet so far away. How the hell would I get there, and how would I ever come back? Could I say no and still pull it off? The general could see I was hesitant. Think about it. I will be here all day tomorrow, and you can call and tell me what you have decided. If I say yes, when will I be going? I didn't say you will. I just wanted to know if you would agree. I have to talk to the right people about this. I got up. I'll call you tomorrow with my answer. I don't really see any problems. I might just need some guarantees. One more thing. Would you see what you can do to take care of my greed, should things work out? Don't worry. We will not leave you hanging, if you will pardon the expression. He and the other man smiled, but I couldn't get myself to do so. What will you call yourself when you call? The general asked. I thought for a moment. Isa. I'll say it's Isa. Ephraim was supposed to have delivered money to me, but for some reason he hadn't. Things would have to start moving, or I'd end up on the street before I knew it. According to my estimation, I could stretch my stay at the hotel for a few more days, and that was it. I forced myself into a joyous mood and called Bella. She wanted to know what was going on and what she was supposed to do for money. Ephraim had promised to arrange a check for her that would look as if it had been sent from me. I was to tell her that it was an advance for the security advising job that I was doing. I was constantly worried about how Bella was making ends meet, but there was very little I could do about it. Later in the day, I called the Jordanians. Can I talk to Zuhir, please? This is Isa. Just a moment, please, Mr. Isa. Seconds later, a second woman came on the line. Mr. Isa, I'm Lorraine. The general will talk to you in a minute. Things were going much better than I could have imagined. Hello, Isa. How are you today? Very well, and yourself? Fine. I'm getting ready for Ramadan. You know this? Sure. I hope you have an easy fast. Thank you. What did you decide? What can I tell you? I was always a sucker for a nice trip. Does that mean yes? Yes, it does. Great. Now I'll tell my people and we'll get back to you. I could feel my insides starting to heat up. I realized that I had to start watching my back more than ever. The process was now irreversible. The information was on its way to Amman and the Jordanian intelligence office there. Among the king's retinue, for sure, the Mossad would have an ear of some sort. Knowing what I knew and could give away, it would become a prime directive to stop me. A team could be preparing to grab me or eliminate me as we spoke. The call came at 8:30 in the morning. It was Zuhair. Are you ready to go? When? How about tomorrow afternoon? That's fine with me. I had made it a condition that he would go with me. I sensed that he was an honorable man, and the promise of safe passage was something that I needed. I was now stepping into an abyss from which the climb back might not be possible. I had 24 hours to prepare for the trip. I had to get to a phone and call Ephraim. What's up? I'm on my way tomorrow. I'll be damned. We don't know anything about this, not even a hint. Do you know that even if you don't go, it's already the biggest farce in this organization's history? I knew exactly what he was talking about. The myth that the Mossad knows exactly what is going on in Arab countries, in this case Jordan, was just that, a myth. I took a deep breath. I couldn't express my relief. You want me to proceed according to plan? Yes, just like we planned it. That is, if they'll let you. So, I'll call you when I come out. How long? The man said 1 week. Tuesday, May 20th. By the time the plane had touched down in Queen Alia International Airport south of Amman, it was dark. We were ushered into a large VIP room where we were greeted, or rather Zuhair was greeted, by a group of uniformed officers. While Zuhair was mingling among his peers, a tall, slim, dark-haired gentleman with a large smile walked up to me. It is an honor to meet you, Isa. You must call me Albert. Pleased to meet you, Albert. Do you speak Arabic at all, my friend? I am afraid I don't. In that case, I hope you will forgive my English and allow me to ask the meaning of words I don't understand. No problem. From what I can hear, your English is nothing you need apologize for. You are too kind. He smiled. I was not about to start the game of names with this man in this strange place, not until I got to know some of the ground rules a little better. A smile could be very deceiving, hiding something very cynical behind it. Then Zuhair walked over. This man will take you to the hotel and will take care of you. I know him and hold him personally responsible for your well-being. He put an arm around my shoulder. Welcome to Jordan. I was taken to the Regency Palace Hotel in Amman. The room was almost identical to the one I'd left behind in Washington, except for the selection of channels on the television. Albert and 3 other men walked in. After the introductions, they all insisted I finish my dinner. I offered to order some food for them. They said they would eat after their friend Fadlal joined us. One of the newcomers was a young chap about 25, apparently the assistant of a heavy-set man in a black suit. The third looked like Albert's older brother, with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses. It was easy to see that they were officers. So, Isa, the heavy-set man, turned to me. I read the report Zuhair sent in, and I find we have so much to talk about, I don't know where to begin. What would you recommend? Well, what I would recommend is to see what it is that I can't do for you, so that you don't have expectations I can't meet. Sounds logical, the heavy-set man said. What, for example, do you think we would like to know and you cannot help us with? I could see where this was going. It was a very good technique. One of the biggest dangers in questioning is letting the person being questioned in on what it is you do and don't know. They handled this technique well, not revealing anything about themselves. First, I assume you would like to know if the Mossad has agents in your midst and who they are. Well, I can tell you that according to reports, there are many agents in your system, mainly in the field command. Because of the way the Mossad is constructed, I couldn't know who they are unless I worked directly with them. There was a knock at the door. All eyes turned to it. Albert stood up. I'll get it. It's probably Fadlal. So, you were saying? The young man said. What I said was that I can't really help you much in the way of names. I could hear the door open and a short conversation in what sounded like an angry voice that Albert was trying to calm down. Before I could turn my head around to see what was going on, I felt something hard press against my head. A strong hand grabbed the back of my collar. The man said something in Arabic that sounded like an order. What the fuck is going on? I called out, making sure not to move my hands. It seemed to me that the gun was of small caliber, but even a .22 at this range was more than enough to scramble my brains. Albert translated. He says you are a Mossad agent and that you're here to trick us. It's not a secret that I come from Mossad. I mean, if I wasn't, would we all be here? He says you're here to trick us. He says that he has it from a good source. This was it, as far as I was concerned. I put the cigarette I'd just taken from the pack into my mouth. I hadn't yet had a chance to light it. Moving only my eyes, I looked at Albert. Tell your man to shoot me or light my cigarette, whichever. But please do it fast. I need a smoke. Everybody in the room began to laugh. The gorilla with the gun, too. He put the gun back in his belt. It is my job to try and catch you, see? He said in English. No hard feelings, I hope. I took his hand and shook it hard. None at all. You do your job, and I'll do mine. He took a lighter out of his pocket and lit my cigarette. Can we get something to eat around here? Why don't you just order a table? Fadlal said to Albert. When Albert went to the phone to make the order, Fadlal turned back to me. Tomorrow we will see if we can really trust you. The two of us will go on a day trip, and then we will know for sure. Where are we going? That you will see tomorrow. So, Isa, what can we do about the Mossad agents in our midst? First, you have to identify the group they belong to. There are several types of agent. One is the basic type, working in a menial job at a hospital or a fire department. He could pass on what is called tactical information. For example, if a hospital gets ready to take in casualties by expanding the number of beds or the fire department calls in the reserves, we can see the first stages of a country going on a war alert. To find these people, you'd have to spend the next 5 years interviewing and pounding the sidewalks. The results will be negligible, especially since most of them don't realize what it is they're doing. They were looking at me and nodding. I wasn't teaching them anything new. Then there is the second level of recruits. They are from the civil service, the foreign office, that is, diplomats, etc. Again, they'd be difficult to detect. So, how is that done? The heavy man asked. Well, I would really like to oblige you, but I seem to have a slight problem. What is that? Albert quickly asked. What will I get out of this? I came here in good faith, and I want to know what it is you are willing to pay me. What do you want? It was the man who looked like Albert's brother. I want a lump sum, and then a salary for 1 year, after which we will renegotiate. What is the lump sum? The young man asked. 20,000 US, sort of pocket money. Then 5,000 a month. If we agree, what will you do in return for all that money? Albert wanted me to get it. I could see it in his eyes. He was going to be my case officer, and this assignment was going to propel him to the top. He wanted me and was going to make sure he got me. That will depend on what you want. I can help you install a system that will prevent anyone from recruiting your people and help you catch those who have been recruited already, almost guaranteeing that any you don't catch will quit on their own. So, what do you say? Do we have a deal, or do you people have to go and talk it over with your bosses? I could see I hit a raw nerve there with the heavy man, who was probably a top-ranking officer. I didn't know much, if anything at all, about the Jordanian service. I was sorry about that now. 12,500 walking money, the heavy man said. 3,500 a month for 6 months. Then we renegotiate. Take it or leave it. We will talk again tomorrow night, if you're still here. Meantime, my friend Isa, enjoy your stay in Jordan, and if you decide not to take the deal, have a nice trip home. The next morning I ordered coffee to the room and was finished when there was a knock on the door. It was Fadlal. I offered him a coffee, but he said we had no time and that we would have coffee in Jericho. I assumed he was talking about some coffee place in Amman named after the king's favorite winter house in Jericho. Here, he handed me a British passport. What is that for? For you. You can't use your Canadian one. It was issued in Israel. Where are we going that I need a passport? I told you, we are going for a coffee in Jericho. My blood was turning to ice. We were about to go to the West Bank. There couldn't be a more dangerous place for me on earth. No. No way, my friend, will you get me to go to the West Bank. I'm a dead man there. I told you the Mossad wanted me to go to the south of Lebanon so that they could eliminate me. Now you want me to cross and re-enter Israel so that you can play some little game? You're crazy. I don't believe a word you're saying. I think that you were sent by the Mossad to mislead us. I'm the one who should be afraid. If you're working for the Mossad, it's me who may not be coming back. What if you're a traitor yourself, and you're taking me and escaping back to Israel? He said something in Arabic, and 2 armed soldiers entered the room. We are going. If, on the other hand, you don't want to, I will tell them to shoot you, and we'll say it was an accident. You have a choice. Come with me on a trip, or die. The bus was almost full, and it seemed that I was the only foreigner on it. I still couldn't believe what was happening. This was my worst nightmare. I tried to remember my name, the one on the passport I'd stuck in my shirt pocket. I couldn't. I had to take it out and look at it again. Stephen Emmons. How the hell was I going to remember that? King Hussein Bridge, the driver announced, and the bus came to a stop. I knew it was the Allenby Bridge. I'd served some time ago on the other side when I was an officer in the military police. Calm down, I said to myself. Go over your cover story before it's too late. One thing you don't want to do in front of a border policeman who's checking your papers is stutter. The story that had been given me went like this. I was on a day trip and was meeting some merchant whose card I had in my pocket. He had religious artifacts for sale, and I was in that line of business. I'd been referred by his brother in Amman. I wasn't the only one on the bus who was uneasy. For the first time I looked at the people around me who'd been talking quite cheerfully until a few minutes ago. The silence that overcame the chatter was suddenly very tense. I could almost feel the heartbeat of the passengers. We were approaching a place that seemed dark, frightening. Up to this moment, entering Israel had always been something that I associated with security and strength, never with fear. Yet now, I was surrounded by that exact feeling. You could see it in every pair of staring eyes. I'd always thought that the stare was hate, because I never thought that there was a reason to fear me. When I was a soldier, all I wanted was to do my job. Only if someone had ill intentions did he have reason to fear me. A Jordanian policeman boarded the bus and made a short inspection. Then he directed the bus to the narrow 40-meter-long bridge. We made our way slowly, under the watchful eye of the Israeli military policeman on the other side. I could hear the orders shouted out in Hebrew. Mishulam, you check the bus. We strip this one. What I heard was not good news for me. The bus stopped and all were ordered off. The military policeman was polite and courteous to me and to the other passengers. A young soldier was teasing him. Why don't you carry their suitcases while you're at it? Why don't you shut up? The older soldier answered. A sergeant walked over and shouted at them. Shut up, you two. Get to work. When I showed my passport, the sergeant pointed to a small shack at the end of the customs tables. Over there, please. I knew he was sending me to the foreign tourist shack. As I started to walk, he called, You Englishman? What is it? I turned to him, smiling. You have no luggage? No. I'm only going to Jericho for a few hours. What if bridge closed before you come back? Then I will have a problem, won't I? Why? Is the bridge going to close today? You never know. I turned and walked over to the hut. Fadlal was being body searched, as I could see when I entered the small building. The young soldier inside asked me a few questions, for which I was well prepared. I was grateful that he kept using my name all the time. It helped me remember it. I walked out to the other side and to the waiting taxis. The taxi filled up, and then we were on our way to Jericho. Fadlal was the last passenger to enter. Fadlal started a casual conversation with me. We arranged to have lunch in a restaurant he recommended. Then he said he'd take me to the store I wanted. The conversation was to benefit anyone in the cab who might be an informant. I had a constant pain in my stomach. I knew it was fear. Fadlal led me to a restaurant filled with Israeli soldiers. A convoy had stopped for a break. "What will you have?" Fadlal asked as the waiter approached. "Whatever you have, I will try." Fadlal didn't argue and made the order in Arabic. "So, what now, my friend?" I asked, feeling it was time to run some sweat down his forehead. There was no way that this man was a Mossad agent, or he would have handed me over already. He was as calm as if he was still in downtown Amman. "We eat, then I take you to the store you are to see, then we go for a walk in Jerusalem, and then back home." "And what did you achieve by that?" "A good meal, a nice trip, and a new friend." "What makes you so sure now that I am what I say I am? That is, if we get back." "I am head of a department in the Jordanian Secret Service. I'm too big a fish to pass up." What if Fadlal was right about being a prize worth having? I tossed that thought out of my mind. The Mossad, as it was today, was far more dangerous to the State of Israel than the Jordanians could ever be. We walked over to the jewelry store I was supposed to visit to reinforce my cover. I was starting to relax. We talked to the merchant, who believed I was who I said I was. Within a few minutes, we were out of Jericho. We drove for about 20 minutes, during which time Fadlal explained to me that this for him was still Jordan, and he didn't feel he was in a foreign land. "We have many friends here who are as loyal to the king today as they were before '67, he said. Fadlal tapped the driver on the shoulder and said something in Arabic. He turned to me. "We'll stop there for a coffee and then head back. I've seen enough. You could have sold me out 10 times and you didn't." I felt a sense of relief. I only had to get back to Amman in one piece, and my mission was almost guaranteed success. I had reached a higher stratum in the Jordanian intelligence in a short time than had any Israeli up to this point. The car came to a stop in front of a 2-story building in the village of Dir Jarir. Children were playing soccer in the dusty field at the end of a short row of houses. Several old men were seated in the shade of a green pergola at the entrance of the local grocery. Fadlal knocked on the metal door and was almost instantly greeted by our host. After an extended series of greetings, we were ushered into a large living room. The furnishings were extremely loud and ornate. It could have been a showroom for Italian velvet furniture. Within minutes, coffee and sweets were brought into the room by the host's wife. Smiling at us, she backed out of the room. Fadlal was not one to waste time. The moment the woman was out of sight, he took a large bundle of American dollars from his pocket and handed it to the host. He then said something to the man in Arabic and signaled me. "We will be leaving in a minute, so drink your coffee and have a sweet." I nodded and sipped the hot coffee. Suddenly, a loud, crashing sound came from the front door. Fadlal's eyes opened wide. The host's face was horrified. Within seconds, there were several Israeli soldiers in the room, pointing their weapons at us and shouting in Hebrew to others outside. "We got them!" the officer shouted. "Search the rest of the house! Go, 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 go!" Soldiers were all over the place. We could hear the woman's cries and the sounds of breaking dishes. One of the soldiers was quickly tying our hands behind our backs with plastic disposable handcuffs. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted in English. "I protest. I'm a British citizen and demand to know what is going on." "You will be quiet," said the officer, pointing his automatic at me. "Bring him in," he said to someone behind him in the hall. One of the old men I'd seen sitting on the other side of the street was brought in. He stood there for a second, hesitant. The officer shouted at him in Arabic. The old man pointed to Fadlal and said something. What I had dreaded had happened. My only hope was to stick to my story and bluff it out as a British subject. The soldiers were speaking Hebrew. "He's a Jordanian officer," they said. "The others probably his men. We'll get more out of them in Ramallah." I knew that I had to do something. I considered jumping out the window, risk being shot, which would be better than what awaited me in the interrogation rooms in Ramallah. "Take him downstairs," said the officer, pointing at Fadlal, "and him," pointing at the host. They left the driver and myself on the floor, guarded by 2 soldiers. Once the others were out of sight, the driver started crying to the soldiers, talking in Arabic. One said to the other in Hebrew, "He says he's an informer. He wants us to call the boss." The soldier who spoke Arabic walked over to the driver and picked him up by the collar, placing the rifle at the back of his head and pushing him toward the door. Suddenly he slipped, and at the same instant his weapon discharged. The sound was deafening, and the wall around the door was at once covered with blood. The driver's head was half missing. The soldier let go of the man, who slumped to the floor like a sack of potatoes. The soldier started shouting at his friend, "You're crazy! Look what you did! You're crazy! It was an accident!" The soldier shouted back, "A fucking accident!" He ran to me, grabbed me by the collar, and shouted at me in Hebrew, "Accident, right? Accident!" I couldn't say a word, only nod. The other soldier shouted in Hebrew, "Shoot him! You have to shoot him! He's a witness, and he'll tell! Shoot him, you idiot, or I will!" He lowered his gun and came at me. I could hear the sound of running up the stairs. The officer was at the door, but he just stopped and stood there. I could see the soldier's finger tightening on the trigger. I hoped it would be over fast. I felt calm. There was nothing I could do. I said to myself, "Bella, I love you. I'm sorry for everything." The soldier pulled the trigger. I heard the knock of the hammer on the empty chamber. There was a moment of silence. I had my eyes shut tight, expecting the final blow. Then I heard the loud laughter of Fadlal. In a single instant it became clear to me that this was all a test. But how the hell did he get the soldiers to play along? Fadlal walked over and helped me up. He gently removed the cuffs from my hands and ushered me out of the place and into the car. There was a new driver behind the wheel, and we drove off. Fadlal explained it all on the way. The soldiers were Palestinians from a special unit of the Jordanian intelligence. They'd been working in the West Bank since '68. They had several storage locations with Israeli uniforms and arms, and would assist in all kinds of reconnaissance jobs. They worked all over the country, and all of them spoke excellent Hebrew. At first, they were to be an asset in case of war, but when Jordanians started to work in the territories, it was decided to use them. They monitored exercises and brought in ample tactical information regarding the front line. The driver was a real traitor, and he had been under suspicion. Fadlal had decided to use the elimination of the traitor to test me. He had no doubt now that I was not working for the Mossad. They were all there: Zuhir, Albert, Fadlal, and the heavyset man and his young assistant. My head was still aching, and the sound of the shot in the house in the West Bank was still fresh in my mind. I wasn't in shock. Endless training in the Mossad had taken care of that, but it was still something I couldn't shrug off. Not to speak of the Jordanian unit that I'd seen, like Israeli soldiers in every way. I suddenly had a new respect for the people seated around the table. I was seated with a very capable group of people, and very dangerous. Over the next 2 days, we put together a security mechanism similar to the one used in the Mossad to prevent moles. They were going to start running lie detector tests on a regular basis, and also sporadic checks in the military, mainly in the lower command echelons. Then they were going to start a systematic check of all personnel that had served in Jordanian embassies around the world, especially Europe, since just about all the agents recruited by the Mossad are people serving in embassies, and students studying abroad, mainly military people. I had no doubt that once implemented, the system would almost instantly identify all agents working for the Mossad. However, implementation would take some months and could not be kept secret during that time, giving the Mossad ample opportunity to pull its agents out. Those who were neither saved by the Mossad nor turned by the Jordanians would end up wearing the hangman's noose. It could not be denied that a real consequence of attempting to bring down the corrupt Mossad leadership was that decent people would suffer. I could only hope that many more would be helped by what I was doing. My last 2 days in Amman were spent putting forward a plan to recruit Israelis who would supply the Jordanians with as much tactical and technological information as possible. It was decided that I would return to the United States and then settle in Canada, as was my original plan. Albert would run his part of the operation in Mexico, and we would use several of Fadlal's special soldiers in the operation. By now I knew that what Ephraim was after was working. We were inoculating Jordan from the dangers of the Mossad. Even if we were not able in the long run to make changes in the Mossad itself, we'd taken a large step forward in removing its fangs. The flight back to the United States went without a hitch. The first thing I did was call Bella from the VIP room at the terminal, where I was waiting with Zuhir for our flight back to Washington. Bella left that same day for the U.S. Arik was going to take her to the airport. That was a surprise to me, since contact between ex-Mossad members and active workers was prohibited. I had a bad feeling that someone might be trying to play a dirty trick. There was only one man to whom I could turn. Uri, my friend from Al, Mossad's top-secret department. If there was any operation planned for the United States, at any time, he'd be the one to know about it. The only problem was making contact with him. All I knew was that he was in the United States. There was one other thing, though. He had a friend in Chevy Chase, Maryland, which wasn't that far from my hotel. I found her address in the phone book and headed out to the house. There was no point in trying to do it over the phone. I knew I'd get nowhere because the woman would have been told in her training not to respond to anyone on the phone except for Uri. I had a cab drop me off about a block away from her house. She was about 5'5" and small-figured. She appeared to be very cheerful. I would like to ask you to please give a message to Uri. Her smile faded instantly. She wanted to know who I was and what my connection was to Uri. A tall, slim man came to the door as we spoke. It was her husband. She told him that I was a friend of Uri's. He asked if I'd like to come in. I had gained his instant respect just for being Uri's friend. I agreed to come in, saying that it would have to be only for a moment. I declined a drink and a cool invitation to dinner from the woman. My declining seemed to make her very happy. I jotted my phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to her. I would very much appreciate if you could pass that on to Uri. At 10 a.m., I was packed and ready to go when the phone rang. It was Uri, and he was furious. How dare I contact his operative? He said I'd scared the shit out of her, and that she was thinking about quitting. I tried to calm him down. Then, as if someone had waved a magic wand, he changed his tone. So, Victor, what can I do for you, and what's the damage in it? No damage, really. I need to know if there is something planned for Washington in the next 24 hours. In what way? You know what I mean. Anything out of the usual. Something they'd warn you to stay away from. What are you up to, man? You didn't answer my question. Nothing that I know of. Can we meet somewhere? At 2, I entered the Four Seasons. Uri was waiting for me and led me to the dining room. Once we were alone, he got to it. What can you tell me about Ephraim? I stared at him for a moment. What can you tell me? If I tell you that I am in his group, will that mean anything to you? Are you? Yes. Are you the loose property he's talking about? I could be, but then I believe I wouldn't be the only one. What can you tell me about Kuti? You are the property, he said. I would never have guessed. Yes, I believe the man was murdered by our people. Let's not tell Ephraim about this conversation, I said. I would prefer to have someone in the group that he doesn't know I know. I don't have a problem with that. Don't you trust him? I do. Today. But as you well know, things change. Little else was said on the subject after that. We decided that the woman would be our contact point. He would call to see if I had left messages for him, and I could do the same. At last, I had a second lifeline, someone I could trust and who would eventually keep me alive. Tuesday, May 27th, 1986. Washington National Airport. I was waiting for Bella to arrive. A crowd of passengers had arrived on a flight from New York, and a few minutes later she appeared. She was breathtaking. Her smile was the light I'd been seeking at the end of the tunnel. I was happier than I could ever remember being. We hardly said a thing until we reached the hotel. She wanted to know where I'd been and what was going on. I had to keep her out of it, and so I told her that I'd visited Zaire and was a security advisor to some people from there. I told her I was going to get some money the following day, and then we'd leave for Canada. The next morning I went downstairs to meet with Zuhir and get the money from him. I then went up the block and bought a car, paying cash. The following day we headed up to Canada. After a 3-day drive, we arrived in Ottawa, the beautiful capital of Canada. We found a 3-bedroom apartment in the downtown area. As far as Bella was concerned, I would have to travel from time to time in my advisory capacity, but otherwise would be able to devote my free time to what I'd always wanted to do, and that was sketch and paint. By the end of July, we were all living in the apartment. Bella, myself, and our daughters, Sharon, who was then 17, and Leora, 12. From time to time, I'd call Ephraim from the payphone across the street to receive instructions. At the time, not much was happening. He wanted me to make contact with the Egyptians, but I kept putting that off. I wasn't comfortable about working with 2 Arab countries at the same time. The peace with Egypt was pressing hard on the Israeli right wing. In itself, the peace, so vigilantly kept by the Egyptians, was living proof that the Arabs are a people with whom peace is possible, and that they are not at all what the Mossad and other elements of the right have portrayed them to be. The Mossad realized that it had to come up with a new threat to the region. Supporting the radical elements of Muslim fundamentalism sat well with the Mossad's general plan. Sunday, June 29th. Bella had gone to Israel for a week to get the rest of our things. At noon, I received a telephone call. "Dick?" I recognized the voice instantly, but I was surprised that Ephraim was calling me at home. "How about we have lunch?" We had a light lunch, and after giving me the office gossip, he came to the point. "You have to make the move to Egypt now. We can't wait any longer. You have to get in there and point out the Mossad connection with the fundamentalists. I'm getting bits of information from time to time, and I need a way to let them have that from a source they will trust." He assured me that the information he had would lead to the arrest of several fundamentalists and the exposure of the armaments supply line from the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. "Destabilize, destabilize, destabilize," Ephraim said. "That is all they're doing, all the time. They don't understand that this jungle they're creating will one day swallow them too." Sunday, July 13th, 1986. I felt very uncomfortable about what I was about to do. I'd been exposed to far too many intelligence agencies in the past few months. It seemed almost impossible that the Egyptians, who had a very efficient, although somewhat obscure agency, had not heard about at least one of my escapades. The flight took off on time, and I was trapped in it, heading for whatever awaited me. I couldn't sleep all the way, feeling guilty about not telling Bella where I was going. But it was more a selfish thought than one of concern. I would at least have had someone besides Ephraim who knew where I was. Friday, July 18th. The naked light bulb dangling from the moldy ceiling flickered momentarily, ending my recollection of the past 6 months. I heard a faint scream somewhere in the bowels of what I had thought to be an empty building. The barely audible shrieks instantly drenched me in cold sweat. I lay on my back, my eyes following a large brown cockroach making its way across the ceiling of my cell. Then the old man was back with a fresh pitcher of lemonade and a food tray. I thought about my predicament. It was already 4 days since I'd been thrown into this cell. The possibility that this might be home for the rest of my life was terrifying. I think it was sometime in the early afternoon when the door opened and a large man in a light gray short-sleeved suit entered the room. I was washing up and was still half-dressed. "Mr. Ostrovsky? I guess you must be looking for me." His smile broadened. I must apologize for the delay in coming to greet you. If you would get dressed, I'll escort you to meet some people who are expecting you." I nodded, and within minutes was following him down the hall into a large conference room. The room appeared to have been plucked out of a modern office building. It was fresh and clean, and seemed quite out of place in this dilapidated structure. There was a coffee maker in the corner, and the aroma of American-style brewed coffee hung in the air. The big man offered me a cup, and then things began to move very fast. The Egyptians handed me a pile of photographs and asked me to identify people from the Mossad. They were not playing games as the other agencies had. Each photo had a name under it in both English and Arabic. There were less than 5 photos that I couldn't identify. My host became much more relaxed once he learned that I could not name any Egyptians working for the Mossad, and he was more than happy to get the information about the weapons infiltration for the Muslim Brothers. He then wanted to hear as much as I could tell him about Robert Maxwell, the British newspaper magnate. His reason was that they were aware of the constant Mossad interest in purchasing media so that they could both influence public opinion and use journalism as a cover for inserting agents into countries. It seemed my host was as eager to show me how much he knew as he was to hear about things he didn't know, not a good trait for an intelligence officer. He identified Maxwell as a Mossad agent, and also reminded me of other occasions on which the Mossad had been behind the purchase of newspapers in England. As an example, he gave the Eastern African, which was bought with Mossad money by an Israeli businessman. The purchase was made, he said, in order to assist the South African propaganda machine in making apartheid more palatable in the West. Suddenly the sinister nature of what was being done with Maxwell became clear to me. In his zeal to cooperate with Israel, and even though he was not an agent himself, Maxwell was a Sayan on the grand scale. The Mossad was financing many of its operations in Europe from monies stolen from the man's newspaper pension fund. What was sinister about it, aside from the theft, was that anyone in his news organization, anywhere in the Middle East, was automatically suspected of working for Israel, and was only one rumor away from the hangman's noose. I explained to my host, as I had to the British, that in the beginning the Mossad would help Maxwell purchase the newspapers by lending him money and causing labor disputes and other problems, making the target purchases more vulnerable. Later the tactics changed. They would target in advance a paper that he was to purchase and start it on a collision course with bankruptcy, using all available strategies, starting with workforce agitation and ending with pullback of funds through bankers and advertisers sympathetic to the Mossad. Then, once the target was softened, they'd send Maxwell in for the kill. That night, my host took me on a drive into the city of Cairo. The city didn't impress me, nor did the pyramids. I was far too frustrated and tense. By midnight, I was back in my cell, with my host's guarantee that he would be back in the morning and that I would be on board Egypt Air, Flight 985 to New York on Sunday. I lay on my back in the cell, staring at the ceiling. I had a feeling that the man had not lied to me. I made a pledge to myself that if I got out of this place, I would not leave Canada again as long as I lived. I'd been a normal human being when I had entered the Mossad. They'd made me callous, and they also made me tenacious. I knew there and then, in that small cell, that the only way to kill the Mossad would be to expose it. By now I knew that they were not the organization they pretended to be, an intelligence agency dedicated to warning the state of potential danger. I was put on the flight to New York as promised. I was given $10,000 for my help. I had to sign a form saying that I had come to Egypt of my own free will, had been well treated, and had received the sum as a gift. When the plane touched down in New York, I wanted to kiss the ground. It was some time later that I learned the reason for the treatment I had received in Cairo. The Egyptians never gave me any, except to say it was a misunderstanding. What happened was that someone had tipped them off that I was a Mossad operative still, working for the Mossad. I was to disinform them and cause havoc by pointing the finger at someone who I would say was a mole working for the Mossad. The decision was to hold me in isolation and see what they could extract from the Mossad by devious means. They informed the embassy they had found the body of a man answering my description who had come to Egypt on the same flight as I had and who was a resident of Canada. They also said they believed he might be Israeli. The message made its way to the Mossad, and because they had no one in the area answering the description, they didn't respond. After 4 days, the Egyptians were convinced that I was not with the Mossad, because they believed the Mossad would, by that time, have at least asked to see the body. It took me several days to get used to being a free man again. Ephraim wanted to know whether I would continue to work with the Egyptians, and I told him I would not, unless it was to pass on information that could hurt the Mossad. I would, however, continue my activities with the Jordanians, since I thought that it could help bring about a peaceful solution to the conflict between Israel and Jordan. Thursday, October 29th, 1986. Ephraim thought it was a good time to lay low. As he put it, Shamir has just instructed the liaison department to start a relationship with the KGB. He says it will help bring out the Soviet Jews. You stay out of things. It is getting much too hot here, and I'll need you to re-establish contact with the British and bring them up to date about an operation that's taking place in London. But I still don't have all the information, and I don't want to get one of our people killed. Who's running it? Barda, he said, as if to say that this in itself would cause the operation to crumble. The London station realized their safe houses were under surveillance, so they've cooled things down, and now Barda will run this operation using 2 other attack case officers from Brussels. So, what do you want me to do? Like I said, once I have more information, you'll call your English friends and pass the information on to them. For the time being, service the Jordanians on a regular basis and wait. I waited for the next several months and enjoyed life. I started a small T-shirt business, designing and printing shirts for businesses and for the Ottawa tourist trade. I named it after my 2 daughters, Sharon and Leora. It was Charlie Creations. It was doing quite well, and it gave me something to do that I liked. But it wasn't as long as I had hoped before Ephraim was back, and we were on our way to put another dent in the Mossad's Teflon armor. January 5th, 1987. I had made a call several days before to the British Embassy in Washington and told them there was some new information they needed to know. Ephraim had provided me with a file on Operation Domino, which was supposed to play itself out over a period of a year in England. The plan was for a Mossad team to carry out the assassination of a Palestinian cartoonist who worked for a Kuwaiti newspaper and then lay the blame on the PLO, or as the buzzword went, Force 17. This operation was to be long and elaborate, involving several elements of the Mossad. There was no doubt in our minds that if the British managed to catch the Mossad in the act, it would damage Anglo-Israeli relations for some time. What made the exposure worth it was that there was no way the Mossad leadership would survive such a scandal. At noon, the Brit arrived at my apartment building. I didn't know the man. He was extremely anxious to hear what it was that I had to say, or as he put it, the cause for my alarm. It was slightly too hot a subject to handle in our present location, so I suggested that I drive to a hotel room I had secured for us. I was very surprised at the speed with which he agreed. Once we were there, we wasted no time. I handed him the file that Ephraim had brought me. It detailed several aspects of the operation already underway in England. Most of the players were already in place. Probably as a result of the information I'd given the British in Washington, they'd managed to follow the Bodlim leaving the Israeli embassy and uncover several safe houses which they were now keeping under close surveillance. A new face came on the scene, a PLO officer who'd been recruited by the Mossad during the war in 1982. The man's name was Muhammad Mustafa Abdulrahman, serial number 13952. The man's only contact in Britain was a Palestinian named Sawan, who had already been working for the Mossad for some time. It was assumed that Sawan was under observation because he was in contact with Barda, his case officer, who in turn had used the safe house that was under surveillance. From this point on, Abdulrahman was going to be portrayed as the villain and the one with a direct tie to the PLO and Force 17. He was going to bring weapons into England and have Sawan keep them for him in his apartment. This would give the British a false sense of security. They wouldn't act as long as they thought they knew what was going on and might reel in some bigger fish. Moreover, they were confident that they were doing it all without the knowledge of the Mossad. At the right time, both Sawan and Abdurrahman would leave the country, and the Mossad Kidon team would come in and carry out the assassination, leaving it to be blamed on Abdurrahman. But by then, he'd be resting in a comfortable, unmarked grave in the Gaza Strip. As good friends should, the Mossad would then provide the British with all the information they needed for the investigation, and would deliver the weapons stash into their hands, throwing in Sawan as an agent gone bad, who was meant to bring in the information but didn't. All this down, as well as having the tape recorder running. He hurled an endless barrage of questions at me, wanting above all to know where this information came from. As best I could, I answered his technical questions, but when it came to the sources, I had to make it clear to him that it was none of his business. The man handed me an envelope. "Our friends wanted you to have this. I know it's not much, but we just want to say thanks." The envelope contained $800. We left the room together, and he said he could find his way from there. I knew he was going to hurry to the British High Commission and send his report as fast as he could. I walked over to the Byward Market in Ottawa, a small but delightful place where I did a quick exercise to see if I was being followed. I was clean, and I headed back to the hotel in Ephraim's room. I gave him a thorough rundown and told him that I hoped they'd managed to stop Operation Domino. I asked if he didn't think that we should call Scotland Yard and inform them. "That, my boy, will defeat our purpose. They'll stop the operation before it even starts, and then the Mossad will come out of it smelling like a rose again. You mustn't worry. They will handle it right. You gave them more than they need for that." Ephraim left the next day. I wouldn't hear about what happened until later. It was July 22nd that Ali Al-Ahmad, a cartoonist for a Kuwaiti newspaper critical of the PLO leadership, was killed, supposedly by Abdul Rahman and a large team of Palestinian assassins. There was uproar in the Palestinian community. The British woke up from their long sleep and kicked the entire Mossad station out of London. One thing, British intelligence is just as responsible as the Mossad for the death of that cartoonist, because they could have prevented it. It reaffirmed what I already knew, that any organization that came into contact with the Mossad was affected in a way that was not to the benefit of the country it served. After I met the British, I had a strong gut feeling that they were not going to be the source of anybody's deliverance out of the darkness of the Mossad's shadow. The task would eventually fall to those who really cared, individuals who would have to take a stand as good men should and expose the monster for what it was. Expose it not to the rotating bed partners the Mossad had, but to the public. I had decided, conceited as it may sound, that I would go to the people. My next stop was a publisher in Toronto. Having a temporary case of cold feet, I decided at the last minute to present the idea as fiction based on a real story. It was a bad idea, and the publisher turned me down. I decided that I might just as well bring Ephraim in on my idea and take advantage of his vast knowledge and his well-placed connections. Ephraim was not enthusiastic. He told me that the Mossad was not going to take such an act sitting down. We had a long history full of examples of men who tried to go against the grain. Most are well-planted 6 feet under, and others are in little bits littering some godforsaken piece of desert. "They'll call you a traitor," Ephraim said. "And what if they find out what I've been doing for the last 2 years? What do you think they'll call me then?" "But that won't happen. Things are going just great at the moment." "Are they really so great? We spent over 2 years playing games your way, and we've achieved nothing. I think it's time to get the real show on the road. If you stick around, I'll consult you as to what will go into the book, because we have, in the end, the same agenda." He sat silently for a moment, then he looked at me and smiled. "What the hell? Let's kick some butt." But who would actually do the writing? I wasn't confident enough, and I wanted a new man who would be able to tell the story in the simplest way and give it the maximum impact. He couldn't be Jewish, for security reasons, and he'd have to have balls. Then there was the need to find a publisher who'd be willing to take on the Mossad. There was also the question of how we were going to get people to believe us. At that point, we had no doubt that the Mossad's official reaction would be, "Viktor Ostrovsky? We've never heard of him. But you might check with the mental health department in the Ministry of Health." Little did we know what was in store for us. Sunday, April 3rd, 1988. Ephraim insisted that the book be handled by as many of the clique as possible. We were sitting in a room at the Four Seasons Hotel. Present were Ephraim, Uri, who made it clear he couldn't stay more than a few hours, Eli, who still thought this was crazy and wanted to go on record as being vehemently against it, so I guess this paragraph would make him extremely happy, and myself. "I need an outline," I said, "some sort of rough sketch of what the book is to be about, in headline form. I'll need more headlines than I'll actually use, so that the person I work with can have a say." We went on to prepare a list, and by the end of the day it was done. I headed home from the meeting and hid the list in a safe place where Bella wouldn't find it. The following day I scouted the bookstores and the library for names of local authors. I saw a book called Friends in High Places about the Canadian Prime Minister. The author was a local reporter working in the Parliamentary Press Gallery by the name of Claire Hoy. I decided to call the man. He responded well, and we had a meeting at a small coffee shop on Bank Street. After I had explained to him what this was about, he was all for it. I had a partner, and I was on my way to putting a real dent in the Mossad's armor. Claire and I spent almost a month preparing the first chapter of the book and tightening the outline. Then we made our first approach to a publisher. It was the company that had published Friends in High Places. The publisher turned us down. At the time, I was very nervous, since I realized that the secret was starting to get out. There was no guarantee that the publisher who turned us down would not talk about what we'd told her. All I know is that if she did talk, then someone was asleep at Mossad headquarters because they did nothing. "We have a meeting with a man by the name of Nelson Doucette," Claire said to me one day. "He's from a publishing house in Toronto called Stoddard, and he's a good man." By then, I'd come to know Claire, and I trusted him, something I've never regretted. We met with Nelson, and we closed the deal. Nelson believed the book would cause quite a stir. They had had experience with another spy book called Spy Catcher, which they had kept secret up to publication date, and then it was banned by the British. He was sure they'd be able to handle this one much the same way. "You don't suppose you'll be able to get the Israelis to ban your book, do you?" he asked. I laughed. "I don't think so," I said. "After all, they have the British experience to learn from. The ban made the book a bestseller." Saturday, July 2nd, 1988. Sometime in the afternoon, the phone rang. "Did you hear what happened in London?" Ellie asked. He was referring to the Brits having expelled just about all of the Mossad London station. The British had posted, in a very obtrusive fashion, police officers outside 7 of the safe houses the Mossad was holding in London at the time. Even though they were unofficially pointing to only 7 out of several hundred, the message was clear enough. There was no way for the Mossad to know from that point on how many of their assets were compromised, or whether any further meetings with Sayanim would endanger them. Claire and I met several times a week in my rented house in Nepean, a small community outside Ottawa. By mid-March, we had just about finished the book. Ephraim had approved most of the things in it and had grudgingly accepted the rest. Nelson Doucette, our sponsor at Stoddard Publishing, told us that he'd secured an editor who was from outside the company but sufficiently tied in to be reliable and discreet. Her name was Frances Hanna, and she was the wife of Bill Hanna, Stoddard's vice president for foreign rights. Once the editing of the book was complete, Bill Hanna made a trip to New York with the galley proofs in hand to give to Tom McCormick, president of St. Martin's Press. Bella and I drove to New York. I was already very uncomfortable about security. There were so many people involved in the book by this time, it was possible that word had leaked back to the Mossad. The meeting with Tom McCormick was very pleasant. He asked some tough questions, but since there was nothing to hide, they were fairly easy to deal with. Almost 2 hours later, I left the meeting. Bill stayed behind to talk business. We checked out and left town. I called Bill from a roadside restaurant, and he gave me the good news. St. Martin's was in. I informed Ephraim of the news once I got back to Ottawa, and he was ecstatic. "This will do it. I have no doubt that this will bring them down," he said. I was not so sure. They can say they don't know me. They can say it's all lies, as they have in the past. Not if I can help it, they won't. They'll just play it one day at a time. September 2nd, 1990. "It's out of the bag," Ephraim said over the phone. "They have a disc of the book and are printing a copy of it. From what I hear, things are not looking too good. It's now in the hands of the Prime Minister." "The little bastard will tell them to have me killed," I said. "I had someone give him a better idea, and I think he has taken the bait." "Can you be more specific?" "I would prefer not to. But I want you to know that you'll have a visitor in the next few days." "Anyone I know?" "I'm not sure, but I think that it will be." Nothing more was said. Claire and I made one more trip to Toronto. We had a meeting with the St. Martin's Press people, and it was decided to postpone publication for a month. At the same time, Stoddard's copies were coming off the press fast. They were stored in an empty warehouse, and a special guard was placed on them. The tension was mounting. We were ready to go. Before we left, Jack Stoddard came to tell us that something strange had happened. He'd just received an anonymous call from someone who said that Israel had hired the law firm of Goodman and Carr in Toronto to stop the publication of our book. At this point, Bella was aware of what was in the book, although she hadn't read it. Some days earlier, we'd taken the girls to an Italian restaurant, and I'd given them an explanation of what was going on. I was bracing them for the fury that might be ahead. Following my return from Toronto, Bella and I went to the Bayshore shopping mall. I spotted them when I made a call from a payphone at the mall, a team of at least 5 people following us at all times. I knew that this was it. We left the mall and headed home. Several days previously, I'd stopped at the Nepean police station with a book jacket. I'd had a talk with the top cop. I explained that I'd written a book about the Israeli Secret Service and that they were going to be very unhappy about it. He promised to be vigilant. The police would respond as fast as they could should there be a problem. At 9 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Bella answered the door. Oren Riff and Ara Le Sheriff were standing there. Oren was the personal assistant to the head of Mossad and my former cadet course commander. Ara Le Sheriff was head of the Tzafririm department in charge of monitoring and activating the world Jewish diaspora. He was my former academy commander. "We want to talk to you," Arale said. "Can we come in?" Oren asked. "If you have anything to say to me, you do it here and now. You're not coming in. What is it that you want?" "We want you to stop the book," Arale said. "I can't believe this from you," Oren said. "It's not my decision to make. Besides, they've already printed the book and are ready to ship it. How many copies could there be for Canada?" Arale said. "You have to stop this book." "It's not that simple." "You know, money is no object," Oren said. "We'll cover all the expenses, plus any projected profits. I have to talk to some people. I need time. Time is what I wanted to buy." "Call me at the consulate in Toronto," Oren said. "I'll wait for your call there until noon." I decided to leave on the stroke of midnight. At 12, I pulled out of my driveway and was immediately followed by a small gray car and a large gray windowless van. I made several evasive maneuvers and got away. I headed straight for the airport and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Station there, known as RCMP. I spoke briefly with a constable, informing him that Mossad people had been on my tail. He promised to inform his commanders and check on me every half hour. There were no flights until the next morning. The flight took off at 7 a.m. There were some problems landing in Toronto Island because of the fog. But we got there eventually, and after a wild cab ride, I arrived at Stoddard's offices. There I had to wait for a while. Eventually, someone came to see me, and I explained what was happening. The Mossad was on our trail. In a talk with Jack Stoddard, I told him that if he wished to withdraw, he'd be handsomely reimbursed by the Mossad, whose representative, Oren Rif, was still waiting for my call at the consulate in Toronto. Jack replied that he had no intention of backing down. Meanwhile, St. Martin's Press had been told to move forward as fast as they could. They had 17,000 copies of the book in their warehouse and decided to ship them out, right then and there. A news conference had been called, and just before, a fax arrived from Goodman and Carr barristers and solicitors, sent by Joel Goldenberg on behalf of the State of Israel, telling Stoddard that they had obtained an order from a judge barring the distribution of the book and ordering me not to discuss information in the book until things were clarified in court. I was muzzled, and for the first time in Canadian history, a foreign country had blocked publication of a book. All this before a single book had left the warehouse and before the lawyers and judge involved had even had a chance to see a copy, unless it was a stolen one. Before legal steps could be taken in the States, St. Martin's Press had already shipped over 12,000 copies to stores. Right from the outset, it was clear to the government of Israel that keeping the book permanently off the bookshelves in Canada and the United States was futile. But they had other plans. It was later, after everything had calmed down, that Ephraim told me what the chief's plans were. He wanted the legal process to prevent me from speaking and answering relevant questions for the first few days, which would give them time to grab me and take me back to Israel. The Mossad assumed that whatever public relations damage my kidnapping might cause would be negligible in comparison to the damage I'd cause if I were allowed to answer questions in the media. It was more the possibility that the Mossad's personal conduct would be revealed that bothered the chief than the revelation of so-called state secrets. The Mossad made its move in the United States and managed to temporarily block further distribution of the book. This was unprecedented, and the reaction in the States was much more vocal and furious than the Canadian reaction. Within 24 hours, the ban was lifted in the States. By then, just about all 12,000 books were sold out, and the stores were clamoring for more. Sales were breaking all records, but at the same time, I was not allowed to speak about what was in the book. I was moving from one location to another in Toronto, planning my next move. On the first day, the RCMP took me under their wing. They approached the job of protecting me with vigor. By day's end, they decided to take me back to Ottawa, where it would be easier to protect my family and me. We drove back to Ottawa. At the Nepean police station, two somewhat embarrassed RCMP constables told the duty officer that the RCMP brass had decided it was the Nepean police's job to protect me. I was told that the decision had been made during the night. They didn't feel that the Mossad would dare take action in Canada, and therefore there was no need for their continued presence. Bella was shocked to see me back, knowing full well that I was far more vulnerable in this setting. The next morning we took evasive action. I got to the train station as the train was about to pull out, and was back in Toronto that afternoon. Once there, I went straight to the Stoddard offices. By then, the media blitz was at full intensity. I was either doing television interviews or giving over-the-phone radio interviews to places as far as Sydney, Australia, or as near as the Toronto Jewish press. The Canadian judge had barred all discussion of the book for a period of 10 days. I knew that this was the interval that the Mossad had to try and stop me. From time to time, I caught them following me, and I would take steps to get away. Before the 10 days were up, I realized it was time to get out of Toronto and go back home. I was running out of ways to leave the Stoddard offices and not develop a pattern. I was also extremely frustrated. I'd been on the ABC Evening News with Peter Jennings, on NBC with Tom Brokaw, and just about every major network. Because of the gag order, I could say almost nothing. There I was, like a dummy, in front of the whole world. When I got back to Ottawa, I was met by a second wave of media. They were Israeli reporters and crews from the local media. What I found stranger than anything was that I was barred from talking about the contents of my book, while Oded Ben-Ami, The representative of Israeli radio was reading sections of my book to his audience in Israel. When I finally got to the house, I was surprised to receive a short message from my father, who had heard about the book for the first time through the media. "Call me," the message said. "Whatever happens, I'm always your dad." This was something that I'd really hoped for. When I needed him most, he was there. I called him, and from that telephone call on, we were the best of friends. Several days later, I managed to make contact with Ephraim. I learned that the Mossad was going to let me be for now. I still knew that if I should leave Canada, things could change rather fast. Accordingly, I decided to publicize, by way of deception, by doing radio shows across the United States and Canada via phone. I managed over 200 shows in less than 3 months, and I also did a long string of television shows by satellite. The first wave of fury the book caused was due to its revelation that the Mossad had advanced knowledge of the notorious suicide bombing in Beirut, but didn't pass on that information to American intelligence. In October 1983, 241 U.S. Marines were killed when a car rigged with explosives rammed their barracks in Beirut. In many instances, this story from the book was taken out of context and told as if I'd said that the Mossad knew Americans were the target, which was not the case. This and numerous other revelations helped propel the book to the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list, where it stayed for 9 weeks. By way of deception, made the bestseller list in almost every one of the 20-odd countries in which it was published. It was published in some 15 different languages, although it's still not available in Hebrew, and by the year's end had sold well over 1 million copies worldwide. One Israeli reporter said in an editorial that someone should put a bullet in my head. Yet another said that I should be tied to a pole and that all of Israel should come and spit on me. Few, if any, Israelis seem to stop and say, maybe what he says has a grain of truth in it. In an effort to bring the right-wing Shamir government to the negotiating table in Madrid for an international peace conference, President George Bush applied the kind of pressure that few American presidents have been brave enough to apply. By ignoring an angry Jewish community, he froze all loan guarantees to Israel with the intention of forcing the cash-strapped Israeli Likud party to the negotiating table. In doing so, he was instantly placed on the blacklist of every Jewish organization in the United States and regarded as the greatest enemy of Israel. A certain right-wing clique in the Mossad regarded the situation as a life-or-death crisis and decided to take matters into their own hands. They believed that Shamir would have ordered what they were about to do if he hadn't been gagged by politics. They were the Israeli versions of Colonel Oliver North, but on a much more lethal level. Since the Mossad had all the security arrangements for the Madrid talks in hand, it would be no problem for this particular clique to bring the killers as close as they might want to the president and then stage the assassination. In the ensuing confusion, it would be the Mossad people who would kill the perpetrators, scoring yet another victory for the Mossad. They'd be very sorry they hadn't been able to save the president, but protecting him was not their job to begin with. With all the security forces involved and the assassins dead, it would be very difficult to determine where the breach in security had been, except that many of the countries, particularly Syria, were already suspected of assisting terrorists. It would be a foregone conclusion where the breach was. As far as the Mossad was concerned, it was a win-win situation. Ephraim called me on October 1. They're out to kill Bush. At first I thought he meant they were going to ruin him. There were several smear campaigns in the making. What's new about that? They've been out to get him for a long time. I mean really kill, as in assassinate. They're going to do it at the Madrid peace talks. What do you want me to do? We're going to do what we can at this end, but nothing we do will become public. I want you to make this thing public. If they know that the Americans know about it, there's a good chance they will not go ahead. The trick would be making it public without coming across like some lunatic with yet another conspiracy theory. I would have to say something in a relatively small forum and hope it got out. As it happened, I was invited to be a speaker at a luncheon for a loosely formed think tank called the Middle East Discussion Group. The aim of this group is to inform the Canadian diplomatic and political community on issues that might not be accessed through the media and to promote dialogue on the Middle East. In my presentation, I said that based on my sources and my knowledge of the Mossad, I would not be at all surprised if there was a plot taking place right at this moment to kill the President of the United States and to throw the blame on some extreme Palestinian group. One of the people at the luncheon called Pete McCloskey, an ex-congressman and close friend of the President. McCloskey called and introduced himself to me and asked whether I had been making a metaphor or was there a real threat in my opinion. I made it clear to him that I was dead serious. There was no way I could tell him I had heard it straight from the horse's mouth, but I had to let him know that I was not completely disconnected from the Mossad. McCloskey called the Secret Service, who in turn checked on me through the CIA, and then asked to speak to me through the Canadian Intelligence Security Service, the CISS, known as CSIS. I told the Secret Service agent who came to Ottawa what I thought was going to take place. I also pointed out that the President was extremely vulnerable aboard Air Force One to a surface-to-air missile or to an explosive device hidden in the luggage of an unsuspecting reporter. The information on the assassination attempt leaked to the media, and I was confident that the President was no longer in any imminent danger. But the decision to eliminate him would not be withdrawn, only postponed. Robert Maxwell's contact was not in the best of moods when he received a call on a special secure line. It was Maxwell phoning from London, saying it was imperative that a meeting be set up. He was willing to come to Madrid. The ties between Mossad and Maxwell went back a long way, but the Mossad had used its ace in the hole one time too many. They were late in giving him back his money, and the usual last-minute rescue of his financial empire was looking less and less feasible. For Maxwell, things were about to go from bad to worse. He insisted on meeting his contact, and when rebuffed, issued a veiled threat. Now that he was being investigated by Parliament and the British media, if he wasn't able to straighten out his financial affairs, he didn't know if he could keep the Khrushchev meeting a secret. He was referring to, and in doing so he sealed his fate, a meeting that he'd helped arrange between the Mossad liaison and the former head of the KGB, Vladimir Khrushchev, who was now in prison for his role in the August coup. At that meeting, held on Maxwell's yacht, the Mossad promised to bring about early recognition of the new regime, as well as assistance for the coup itself. In exchange, they requested that all Soviet Jews be released, creating a massive exodus of people too large to go anywhere but Israel. This would create a natural settling of Jews in the occupied territories, which would not be countered on the world scene as it was a rescue mission. It was Maxwell who'd helped create the ties with the now defunct KGB. The right-wingers realized it would be a devastating blow to Israel's standing if the world learned of the Mossad's involvement, however minor, in the attempted coup. Maxwell used the threat of this to try and force immediate aid to his failing empire. A small meeting of right-wingers at Mossad headquarters resulted in a consensus to terminate Maxwell. He was asked to come to Spain the following day. His contact promised that things would be worked out, and he'd receive as much money as he needed in order to calm the situation. All this was to be kept completely quiet, as his enemies would like nothing better than to show his direct connection with the Mossad. As he dined alone in a restaurant on the island of Tenerife, someone walked over to him and gave him a message that he should be in Los Cristos, on the other side of the island, next morning, sailing his yacht around the island of Grand Canary. Sometime during the night, from November 4th to 5th, the Mossad's problem was laid to rest in the salty waters of the Atlantic. I learned all this in a phone conversation with Ephraim. He had no idea how the team had managed to get to Maxwell at sea while the yacht was cruising at 15 knots, but making it look impossible was part of the Kidon magic. Sometime later, after I had finished my first novel, Line of Judah, Uri came to visit me. I had hardly had any contact with the clique since 1991. I was at the time about to finish a second novel and was asked to go on tour to promote Lion of Judah in Holland. I was reluctant to do so. Things were going great, and I didn't want to risk ending up in a prison cell in Israel. I'd contacted Ephraim to ask for his advice, and he'd sent Uri to talk it over. "You're in no danger," Uri said. "The Labour government is not the right-wing Likud. Things have changed. In fact, we recommend you go, to prove the point." I was very hesitant, but the chance to travel and at the same time get the adrenaline rush going was extremely tempting. I put together a small security team of 3 university students from Ottawa, whom I taught to play the role of security people. They were there more for show than anything else. I knew that I couldn't rely on any professional security companies because of the high numbers of Israelis they employ, and the fact that many of them report regularly to the Israeli authorities. Everything went well in Holland, and then we went to Belgium for the 2 final days of the tour. Knowing the history of the Mossad in Belgium and the corruption of the Belgian police force, I knew I was walking into a snake pit. But Ephraim's promise was all the shield I needed. On the last day in Belgium, I was scheduled to appear as a guest on a television show in Brussels. All was fine until the show was over, and my security team and myself headed for the car to take us back to the hotel in Antwerp. The car wasn't there, and neither was the driver. An alternative car was suggested. This didn't smell right to me or to my team. Since the television station wasn't far from the Brussels International Airport, we decided to move fast. We ordered taxis and split into groups. Our Belgian publisher drove one of the guys and me to the hotel, and the others took 2 cabs. We left the place in 3 different directions and even sent an empty cab off somewhere else. All I wanted to do was get out of that city and get Ephraim on the line. If there was something going on, I was sure he'd know about it and instruct me what to do. It was after midnight when I made the call. "Hello? Ephraim?" "Yes, who is that?" "It's me." "Me who?" "Victor, wake up, man." "I'm awake." "Victor who?" "What is this? Not in the mood for games, Ephraim." "Is this Victor Ostrovsky? What are you playing at?" "How are you? Where are you?" "You know where I am." "What are you talking about?" "Ephraim, I'm warning you. Don't play games with me. I'm not in the mood." "Don't you ever threaten me. Don't make the same mistake Spiro did. Am I making myself clear, my boy?" "You son of a bitch," I said and hung up. I was in it deeper than I cared to think. Jan Spiro was a Sayan who'd worked with the Mossad for many years. He was a very helpful contact since he dealt with various Lebanese factions. He was a British citizen living in the U.S. His contact with the Iranians and the Shiites in Lebanon made him a lot of money over the years, but he'd taken one cut too many. The Mossad had given him several $1 million to pay off some Lebanese family who could in turn bring about the release of the captured Israeli airman, Ron Arad. As a result of Spiro's involvement with the Iran-Contra affair, the Lebanese were not willing to deal with him anymore. But he held on to the money. When the Kidon team came to his house November 7th, 1992, to get the money back, something went wrong, and his wife and 3 children were killed. He was taken to the desert, where the team forced him to reveal where he'd stashed the money after he first tried to claim he'd given it to the Lebanese. He was then fed poison that he happened to have with him. The poison was a substance used to check the purity of gold he'd been interested in mining. At that point, I had no doubt that my time was starting to run out. Early in the morning, we all got into a cab and headed back to Holland. Crossing the Dutch border was a great relief, but I knew I wasn't out of the woods until I was back on Canadian soil. I made one last call from the hotel to Uri, but for some reason I was cut off. During the flight, I finally realized what had happened. I was going to take some steps to verify it. There had been a power struggle in the Mossad for the top job. By now, it was safe to say that Ephraim and his clique were probably the only ranking officers in the Mossad not to have screwed up. That being the case, Ephraim was more than likely to be tapped to run things, unless a new man was brought in from the outside. And in all likelihood, it would only be a matter of time before he and the clique came gunning for me. I was the weak link, and the most vulnerable one. So what I had to do was clear. I had to put everything else aside and write this story for everyone to see. Now it's done, and it's out of my hands. You be the judge.